Awesome. It is 6:32, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Lunenburg School Committee to order. Dr. Burnham, we'll turn it to you.
Good evening, everyone. As a preliminary matter, this is Dr. Burnham, Superintendent of Schools. I will do a roll call to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Chair, Mrs. Carol Ashambo.
Yes.
Vice Chair, Mr. Brian Leighton will be joining late. Secretary, Mrs. Laura Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Anthony Schoenbrini.
Yes.
Mr. Peter Beardmore.
Here.
And do we see our student representative? I do not. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Recording Secretary, Ms. Susan Summers.
Yes.
Business Manager, Mr. Michael Cassidy.
Yes.
Director of Teaching and Learning, Ms. Annika Scott.
Yes.
Title I Coordinator and Literacy Specialist, Ms. Deirdre McLean.
Yes.
And Math Specialist, Ms. Amy Raboyne.
Yes.
All right, I'll turn it back to you now, Mrs. Archambault.
All righty. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and will be broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Channel and streaming on Facebook Live at a later time. And this meeting of the Lunenburg School Committee is being conducted remotely. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, public meetings may be conducted remotely. The order, which you can find posted on the town website, on the COVID-19 Information Center page, accessed through the town manager's webpage, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Lunenburg School Committee is convening by telephone conference, video conference, via Zoom app, Facebook Live, etc., as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. For Zoom meetings, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and that you take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude remarks, I will ask anyone if they have any of the members, if they have any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Speak accurately and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, we will do public comment. I'll talk about that in a minute. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Now it's public comment. So comments regarding any topic under the scope of the authority of the school committee can be entertained during either public comment session. The first comment session is directly after the call to order. Please remember, comments are limited to 3 minutes per comment and 10 minutes in total. The 10-minute total can be increased by a vote of the committee. Public comments about individual students are prohibited to protect the privacy of the student per state and federal law. So with that being said, are there any public comments this evening? From the board first? Mr. Beardmore?
Yes, just to start the night off on a light note, with consultation from Mrs. Archambault, I have volunteered the school committee to participate in the Trunk or Treat event that is happening on October 30th at the middle high school. I will do my best to coordinate. I think I might even have a sponsor who might help us out purchasing some candy. But if you have any ideas or themes or anything, I'm at mile marker 0 on this, so please reach out to me and I will reach out back to you individually to coordinate as best I can. And thank you for agreeing to participate.
And thank you for thinking of it and organizing. We appreciate it. That will be fun.
I hope so.
Are there any other public comments? I see no hands raised, so I'm going to assume there are not. So we're going to go to the chair's report, and I apologize, I am probably wordy, but I will do the best I can to move right along. So this evening, I'd like to mention why we opted for an equity audit and what that means. In 2019, the Lunenburg School Committee, along with hundreds of others in the Commonwealth, voted to support the Student Opportunity Act. This initiative was adopted statewide in response to the notion that the quality of a child's education should not be tied to their zip code. Students throughout the state should have equal, equitable access to a quality education. After that act became law, I started thinking that just because all of Lunenburg students have the same zip code and go to the same school, that doesn't mean they have the same access to education. Issues such as illness, poverty, learning differences, both accelerated and challenged, language and culture may be affecting access to our curriculum. I would point out that I believe our staff members treat students fairly. I don't believe any staff member tries to be unfair. I have learned, however, that fair is not always equal. So to have equitable access to curriculum and achievement, students need to be provided with what they need to be successful. This is what increasing achievement is all about, gaining access. The school committee took on the topic of equity as a goal last year. I developed the goal and suggested it. The equity audit is part of that goal. The consultants from the equity process are looking at how we interact and provide for all children. They will make suggestions about our current practices, our school culture, and academic choices. We will then determine which recommendations we wish to implement. I have heard we should spend less time on equity and more time on achievement from some folks. I believe this work in the area of equity will help to create a more inclusive culture, provide all students with a more differentiated instruction, and will lead to higher achievement for all. So once again, with the chair's report, I do like to comment on public comments that have been made previously. So I just wanted to clear up anything regarding our equity audit. So that being said, and I was going to mention truck or treat, but thank you very much, Mr. Beardmore, for taking care of that. We have minutes to approve from the joint session on the 19th of July. Did anyone have any problems with those minutes? I did not.
My
So-
only comment is it's something to read about yourself for 4 pages.
Well,
Who
That's
actually,
what happened.
who actually writes these minutes?
our secretary,
Suzanne.
Ms.
Susan,
Summers.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It was extraordinarily detailed and something to read from my perspective. So thank you.
All right. So could I have a motion then to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
And a second?
I was not in attendance. I think I'm gonna have to abstain for this,
Ooh.
just so we know, yeah.
Oh, there's
But
Mr.
Brian, though, so
Hickman.
we're good.
Oh, there we go. Just in
All
time.
right.
Perfect.
So Carol, my intent is to abstain from this because I wasn't a member, so.
Yes, so I will tell Brian what we're doing and see if he will second the motion. We were talking about the minutes on the July 19th meeting, a joint session with the select board. And Mr. Schoenbrini made a motion to accept those minutes, and we're looking for a second.
I will second that motion.
Thank you so much. And could we have a roll call vote then?
Mr. Beardmore,
Abstain.
Mr. Schoenbrini,
Aye.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
Mrs. Kelly,
I will abstain.
and Mrs. Archambeau.
Yes. Awesome, that's all taken care of. Now we have to review and approve line item transfers. Mr. Cassidy.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Last meeting, I had problems with my microphone, so that's good. This evening, there's a transfer in the amount of $225,218 in front of the school committee. These are transfers within the salary and wages account. Why is there such a significant amount? This is an annual transfer after all of our hirings have been done. Based upon the budget that we had approved and the actual hirings during the summer, and any other fallout regarding any collective bargaining agreements. It's really just reshuffling the salary and wages account. So if I may, just kind of highlight a few of the accounts that we're taking money from. So one of the accounts is, I'm going to share this screen for the
Thank
public.
you.
Hold on a second. Okay, sorry about that. We did have a salary reserve of $10,996 for collective bargaining agreement settlements. So we're drawing money from that. Another large amount is the librarian. That's that position is shifted now. It's in between two schools. At the time of the budget, we had a library para that we had set money aside for. That model doesn't exist anymore. So we're shifting the money where the money where the staff is going. We are shifting some of the money from the paraprofessionals down at the primary up to the high school, where more FTEs have been needed due to IEPs and student needs. So we're shifting money up there. I inadvertently included an account that we're not transferring anything from, so I apologize for that. There's a retirement transfer from the longevity. I overfunded one account and I underfunded another, so we're just going to try to reconcile that tonight. There's a small amount of money in teachers at the elementary school, just due to staff turnover. The kindergarten teacher, that the extra kindergarten teacher was budgeted. This is going back a ways. I hope you guys don't forget this, but that position, it was that we shifted that to a social worker toward the end of the springtime. So we're moving that money out of that account. There was a reorganization at the high school middle. So we're transferring some money to reconcile those accounts. And then finally, there was an over budget on the principals, and we're shifting that money. The accounts that it's going to are a lot of it is going to the clerical contractual requirements and some other contractual requirements, staff requirements. Some other increases do include replacement of staff. So if you look at some of our school resource, our SPED resource room, the staff that we hired was more costly than the staff that was let go. For example, I know at the elementary school, a first year teacher, bachelor's, wasn't returning. We ended up replacing that with someone who had a master's. So we have to make that adjustment. So that's where some of these accounts and adjustments come from. These are all these little scenarios. As I referenced, the paraprofessionals at the high school, that social worker position at the primary school, some adjustments to psychologists, underfunding of the coordinator stipend at $52. And this one is kind of a moving target, which is the clothing and maintenance, clothing allowance for our custodial staff. We've just had some turnover, more turnover than budgeted, which is good because we're hiring some good quality candidates for our position. So this is something that we do annually. I anticipate another transfer for any adjustments on our expense account, maybe even at our next meeting. Waiting for some of the utility budgets to kind of settle down and kind of project some of those expenses during the year. So that is in front of you tonight for a vote. I'd be happy to answer any questions on these transfers.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cassidy? Sing out, because I can't see you.
Yeah, Carol, I do.
Okay,
Mr. Cassidy, I'm just kind of looking at the big numbers here, and forgive me if you've stated this in other words, but big numbers transferring out kindergarten teachers and kindergarten paraprofessionals. Are we down a class, or what? Why are those numbers so big?
During the budget process, I'll start with the teacher, Mr. Beardmore. And we'll have to make a decision again this year. But based upon the enrollment numbers, as a safeguard, we budgeted an FTE, an extra kindergarten position at the primary school. By the time that the budget was reconciled and voted, based upon the enrollment numbers, the administration felt that an additional kindergarten position wasn't needed. So at that time, the administration recommended using that extra FTE as a social worker, an additional social worker at the primary school. So that big number, that big teacher's number is an FTE that, a person was not fired or terminated or anything like that. It was an FTE that was budgeted that we're reallocating to a different student need.
Okay.
Now, the paraprofessionals, this is something that we do internally, but as students move from the primary to Turkey Hill to middle, and middle to high school, these are special ed students. Some may, within their IEPs, have different requirements for one-on-one services. So it's really a movement of staff with the students. So we don't necessarily move the person, but if we regardless, we would have to move the money with the person. We just move the FTE and the money as with the student and with the IEP. So in this whole reconciliation, the primary lost 2, and then we ended up with some at the high school.
Okay.
So that's a long explanation.
No, I appreciate
on
you
those
taking
big
the time.
accounts, but it's an internal thing, and it's really focusing on student needs.
I appreciate you taking the time. Similar question on the lines that we're adding to. First of all, there are 2 lines here that say social workers' salaries. I'm assuming these are for different buildings. Is that why they're different lines?
Yeah, once again, these are live and die by Munis. These are just Munis accounts. So the second account right here is the primary school social worker.
Okay.
And this is the high school social worker. the former, we had a social worker resign, and we had to replace her up at the high school, and we had to pay that person a little bit more to replace her.
Okay. And suffice to say that $56,618, that represents more or less an FTE for the primary school social worker.
If I heard you correctly, yeah. That is 56,000 is for there's 2 social workers in there. So originally we had 1 budgeted, the new hire cost this much, and that'll result in a new total for that account.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else with a question for Mr. Cassidy? As always, I really appreciate you explaining everything, and you're making everything so very transparent. We appreciate, and I'm sure the public does, knowing exactly what it is where the money goes, and making sure that the money stays in the right place. So I thank you for that. And I would just say that Mrs. Kelly texted me that her computer is not cooperating and she will be back. So it happens. So do I have a motion to accept Mr. Cassidy's line item transfer?
So moved.
And a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, then a roll call vote.
Mr. Schoenbrini,
Yes.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
Beardmore,
Yes.
and Mrs. Ashambo.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Next, we have the superintendent's report.
Good evening again, everyone. A little update on our equity audit. Folks from the equity process came to the district on Monday and conducted classroom visits in each of our school buildings. Next steps are interviews. There will be some selected interviews conducted, as well as surveys for staff, families, and students. Have a little bit of an update on the Snack Shack upgrades. We are still working to have that Snack Shack open and operational to serve the hot food for our homecoming game. It is not quite ready yet, so keep fingers crossed that everything stays on track there. Assessment results. Student MCAS and iReady individual student score reports were put in the mail last Friday. If parents do not already have those reports, they should be coming in the mail any day, so be on the lookout for those. This evening, we'll present an overview of the district's assessment data. Each school will host a Zoom meeting for parents where the school's MCAS and iReady data will be presented, and parents will have an opportunity to ask questions. We already hosted the primary school presentation on iReady data and the new curriculum. On Monday, the 24th, the Turkey Hill will host a forum for parents that begins at 6:30. On Tuesday, the 25th, the middle school will host a forum for families that also begins at 6:30. And on Thursday, the 27th, the high school will host their forum also at 6:30. And folks can be watching for meeting links to be coming from the school principals. Some reminders for the remainder of the month and early into November. Tomorrow evening is the middle high school parent-teacher conferences. On the 26th will be the Turkey Hill Primary School evening parent conferences. That same evening, I already indicated that the school department will be presenting the FY24 capital plan to the capital planning committee. On the 27th, the school department will be presenting to the finance committee. On the 29th, we have homecoming float parade and the football game, as well as the Boys and Girls Club hosting Shrieks and Creeks. Mrs. Kelly is coming back in. On the 30th, we have Miles for Miles. That will be running from TCP early in the morning. And Trunk or Treat will be at the middle high school from noon to 3, hosted by the Lunenburg Business Association. And our next meeting of the school committee is on November 2nd. That will be a hybrid meeting from Town Hall beginning at 6:30. And I want to put on everybody's radar early that we've got a STEM night at the primary school scheduled for November 7th. And that's all I have for you this evening.
That sounds very busy.
Very busy.
Mr. Beardmore?
So just a comment, we've got a really big weekend coming up with homecoming weekend this year. And, you know, whatever we can do to encourage faculty, staff, everybody involved in the schools to come on out for Miles for Miles, the homecoming parade, the homecoming game, trunk or treat, whatever. It's a big weekend in Lunenburg. I'm super excited about it. And so that, you know, but it should be great. There's so much happening that weekend. It should be really awesome.
My first one.
Yeah, good, good. You're in for an experience. So with respect to the Snack Shack, I know that, you know, these upgrades also come with some additional responsibilities and certification and that kind of thing. But we also have volunteers coming in and out of that space. The musicators typically run the Snack Shack during football games. I'm assuming that's happening on the 29th. Do we have a school department person who's going to be the Snack Shack czar to make sure that we're in compliance?
So we will be hiring a stipended position for oversight. The operation of the Snack Shack has to be kept separate from our food service program. But we do intend to have a stipended position for some oversight and making sure everybody leaves the Snack Shack as they must, according to, you know, the codes that are going to be in place. And we will be back with some policy for you to consider around the Snack Shack and use of the Snack Shack operations, that sort of thing. And we will also need to revisit the rental fee that's associated with the Snack Shack. The boosters are well aware that there will be some added cost for these upgrades, and they were fully on board with the upgrades. So again, all of that will be coming to you, not in time, obviously, for hopefully the grand opening of the newly upgraded Snack Shack for homecoming. But we will have some time through the winter months to get all of those things in place for the spring season use of the concession stand.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, I don't believe we have a student representative. I just looked a minute ago, unless somebody popped in. Let me look again. Nope. Nope, no student representatives, so we will go on to new business. And it is the initial approval of the 8th grade Washington DC trip. That's exciting.
So I'll invite Amy Raboyne, who has been a teacher at the middle school, high school for a number of years. And this year she's serving in the role of full-time math specialist, but she feels really passionate about this trip. So she volunteered to help Mr. Santry out and organize some information around the Washington trip. So I'll turn it over to Amy. You should have the ability to share slides. Let me know if you can't.
I will give that. It says host disabled participants sharing. But you are welcome to share them.
You are now a co-host.
Feels so important.
It's the closest thing to a magic wand I have.
Okay. All right. Can you all see the slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight. As Dr. Burnham said, I am incredibly passionate about this trip. I've been an 8th grade teacher for 15 years in Lunenburg, and I've gone on this trip every year except for one, when I was the senior class advisor and had to finish floats and everything else on homecoming and graduation. So we have our initial dates for the trip are May 23rd to 26th. The vendor that we've been speaking to has also asked if we would set up some alternative dates just in case, based on pricing and things like that for our students and families. So again, the Washington DC trip has not happened now for 3 years. And its loss has really been felt by families, by students, and by teachers and chaperones who love to go on this trip. It's very important that we bring the trip back. It's a staple of the 8th grade experience, as Nature's Classroom is for 5th grade. The iCivics curriculum, the new civics curriculum, focuses so much on our country's history, on its founding principles, and this trip lends itself so beautifully to bringing that curriculum to life for our students. So we really are very hopeful that we can bring this trip back this year. The process of selecting a company began in August. Once I got the go-ahead, Mr. Cassidy and I put together a vendor inquiry. Sorry, my daughter is FaceTiming me. Let me get rid of her. We put together a vendor inquiry, and then I found some local companies to send this inquiry out to. I sent it to 4 different places in the hopes of finding a professional vendor to relook at our plan, relook at our trip as we've run it in the past, and bring some fresh eyes to this trip. Only one of the vendors responded, and that was Education First Explore America out of Cambridge. So they have been the company that is willing to work with us for this year. Now, the total cost in the past, the past few years that we ran the trip, the cost was approximately $935 per student for a 4-day trip, leaving on a Tuesday morning early, arriving back on a Friday evening. Explore America for a 4-day trip in 2023 is proposing $1,350 per student. We did speak about reducing that cost, and they said if we wanted to remove a day and do a 3-day, 2-night trip instead, the cost would come down to $1,200 per student. So we're looking at approximately a $415 increase in the cost of the trip from 2020 to 2023. So what's included in this trip, they run their trips a little bit differently. They do not bus us down to DC. They have partnerships with JetBlue, American Airlines, and Delta. They have partnerships with many hotels in the DC area. And so what they do is provide us flights instead of busing, and they, about 60 days before the trip, speak with all of their partners and come up with the cheapest price for our school. Once arriving in DC, we will be provided with 3 coach buses to transport us around DC, and these buses are run by companies who know the DC area very, very well. Also included are all the meals. The only meals that are not included, and this was always the case, even in our old trip, was breakfast on the first morning and dinner on the way home. And due to the flights, that makes perfect sense. Hotel and accommodations are included. Entrance fees, guided tours, our tour guides take us around to all the monuments. That is also included in the price. They provide us with a 24/7 tour director who comes with us on the trip, stays with us every step of the way on the trip, and will work very closely with me in managing the trip to make sure it runs very smoothly. Because of the size of this company, they have a 24/7 emergency support team. So should a bus break down or should some other emergency happen, our tour director is able to stay focused with me on the students on the trip, and then the emergency support crew is the one working behind the scenes to resolve any issues that may come up. This company recommends a 10-to-1 student chaperone ratio, and if we stick within that ratio, our chaperones are free. We have 1 free chaperone for every 10 students to go on the trip. They do provide a $50 early enrollment discount. I believe it's within the first week of the notification of the parent meeting. And they also have a peace of mind policy, which is, I believe, new since COVID. If the trip got canceled, the hotel shut down, the flights were canceled, if a student came down with COVID and needed to be quarantined in a separate hotel room that we hadn't originally accounted for, scenarios like that, the company will pay for those additional expenses, no matter what the travel protection plan is that the family or the student has. This company spent a lot of time talking to me about why airlines and not bus, because that was one of my questions. And they said that the bus driver shortage really happened after COVID. The bus industry was really hit hard. People were not traveling. And in addition, the regulations on bus drivers' hours are incredibly strict. And we did see that beginning to occur in 2017 and 2018 and 2019, where we had to have our bus drivers travel to a local hotel so that they could sleep overnight because they couldn't be driving for so many hours. So there are a lot of complications with the bus companies, and they have such good partnerships with airlines that they felt more comfortable moving to the airline. The benefits of air travel, certainly shorter travel time. Flying is safer than 3 buses traveling on the road for 9 hours, and you're there earlier. You're in DC at noon versus 4:30 in the afternoon, and you can stay a little bit later on that last day because the flight home is about 2 hours. Plus, it's a very special experience for the kids. And from a chaperone point of view, if you've never spent 9 hours on a school bus with 45 very smelly 8th graders, you too would want to fly in the airplane. That I will say that other companies are still using buses. This is just this particular company's preference based on their partnerships. Now, how do we get to and from the airport? We did a little bit of research on that. The company is willing to send our buses to Lunenburg Middle School, pick up kids, transport them to Logan Airport. So students would leave the middle school and go to Logan. It would cost an extra $79 per student to do that. We did reach out to D-Bus to see what they might be able to provide to us, and they would be charging us $500 per bus per direction. So 500 in, 500 home, and we're anticipating 3 buses. The caveat there is that they have to be able to obviously get kids to school. So the timing of the buses dropping us off and picking us up could be an issue. And, you know, we don't know that information right now. It is possible that a parent may say, you know what, I want to drive my child to the airport and say goodbye to them at the airport. That is perfectly fine. We would just need to have that information long in advance. So as we're reserving buses to transport everybody else, we would know how many buses we'd need. So other benefits from this particular company: more sites due to shorter travel time. Because we're not on the bus for all that time, we're able to see more, and their itinerary does include some things that we've never been able to see. Their emergency service and support team will handle anything: injuries, communication with families. If a parent or guardian needs to call the company and get in touch with their child, they're able to handle that for us. They provide background checks on every adult over 18 going on the trip, including all the bus drivers that would be in contact with our students in Washington, D.C. They do provide some travel protection plan options, which I'll go over shortly. They have general liability coverage. I believe it's in the amount of $50 million. So they set up a rider that covers group leaders as well as the school. The tour consultant will work with us. This is different than our travel person who comes with us. This consultant will work with us to very specifically customize the itinerary that we feel is best for our students. Our support team, traveler support team, is going to manage all the payment plans. If you have a child with a food allergy, you get in touch with them. They take care of communication with restaurants and all of that, all those family specific needs. They do have a partnership with the telehealth service. So if a student comes down with something, they need to see a doctor, we are able to get a telehealth service in addition to the nurse that will come on the trip. They have hand sanitizer, face masks available, and they do have payment plans available for families. They do give us a group incentive. If after we have 35 paying travelers registered, we receive $1,500 in scholarship money. For every additional 5 paying travelers, we get another $250 in scholarships. So if 120 students enroll, 12 chaperones, 10 for free, and the school gets $5,750 in scholarship money, which we can then distribute to families who might need some support in paying for the trip. And there are the travel protection plans. I already talked about the peace of mind plan that's provided to everybody. If the trip gets canceled up to 45 days before departure for any reason, if it's canceled due to an issue like COVID, vouchers could be provided or the trip could be rescheduled for a later date. Parents can opt for a travel protection plan. It costs $99 per student. It's available to everybody. The cancellation needs to occur a minimum of 45 days before the scheduled departure. And if you have this protection plan, you would get all of your money refunded to you except for your $95 registration fee. Then there's the Anytime Protection Plan, which is certainly their most expensive option. It's $279 per student. It's available to everyone, but cancellation could literally occur at any time, including the day before or the morning of. And all money would be returned again, except the $95 registration fee. So that's the information that I have as of right now. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that I do understand the expense of this trip. This is an expensive trip, more expensive than the trips we've had in the past. This is the only response I got for this year. This price is good up until October 25th, so next week, and then I would have to renegotiate this bid with them. My intent would be to rebid the trip in June. For the 2024 year. The scholarship assistance is one of the biggest benefits, I think, of this program. This is a very reputable, above board company. They're very transparent. Where our money is going is made very clear to us. And we've also worked with this company before. They've run some other school trips run by the high school, the Galapagos trip. So we do have experience with this company.
Thank you very much. It's a lot of information. Are there any questions for Mrs. Reboyne? Mr. Beardmore?
Mrs. Reboyne, thank you for doing this. This is a big undertaking. You had showed a couple of different scenarios, 3 and 4 day options. Are you going with the 4-day option, or what is the request in front of us?
Well, I'm not going with anything until we get approval to go with something, because it's not my call to make, but my recommendation is definitely the 4-day trip. I think the 3-day trip is very, very short. We like to give the kids a little bit of breathing time. We don't like rushing them through everything, and there's so much to see. So my recommendation would be the 4-day trip.
Okay, so suffice to say, you are presenting those options to the school committee to choose. Is that a correct interpretation?
I am presenting the information that I found out for the school committee to discuss and give me direction for how to move forward.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to be clear. The busing options, is that a similar, like you're looking for guidance in terms of what we think on this, or do you have a preference on that as well?
The busing is not an option for this one company that did respond to the bid. If we rebid and another company did provide busing, we would go that route. For
Okay.
me, it's not I mean, my personal preference is to fly, just having been on those buses before.
No.
But it's not a factor of whether we would do the trip or not. It's simply, this is what's available to us by this company.
I'm sorry, I probably phrased this wrong. I meant the
Okay.
busing to and from the airport. So you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
$79 option or a lump sum $3,000 option with D. I'm looking for some clarification in terms of, are you looking for guidance from us, or do you have a recommendation?
I
Wonderful.
don't really have a recommendation at this time. I would need more information from D Busing as it got closer to see if they were even able to service this trip. So I'd have to work with D Bus, because depending on the time of flights, it is possible that D Bus would not be able to provide us with the transportation that we might need. So I'd have to work very closely with them as well as the travel company. But we would always give parents the option to transport their own child rather than pay an extra fee of any kind.
Okay, so I'm just trying to map this out here. You're gonna open this for registration next week. It's gonna be for a certain dollar value for the Washington DC trip that's gonna include flights, hotels, all that kind of stuff. And then you're gonna say, but we haven't figured out transportation to and from the airport yet. There's either another 79 or 25, or you're transporting your kid, but that is going to be figured out later. Is that?
That is one option, but that's a fair point, and it may make more sense for us to simply make a decision. Either we do this, or parents can bring their own child. Again, I'll be looking for guidance from Dr. Burnham and Mr. Santry, as well as school committee, on the best way to move forward with that. But that is a fair point.
Okay, and then my last question is with respect to the scholarship money associated with this. So I think that that's a great thing. This is an expensive trip, and I want as many kids to be able to go on this thing as possible. The problem with this kind of program, however, is, as you just described it, I'm a marketer. So I think in terms of how can I game the system, right? Or how are my potential customers going to game the system? If I know that there's potential money available and I might qualify, I might not sign up, like that kind of thing. Have you kind of thought through how that money will be distributed, how you'll determine who's going to get it? Like
Absolutely.
that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I don't handle that. That is something that's done by Mr. Santry, because I do not have access, nor do I want access to families that might qualify for that particular assistance. So once we know how much, we have families typically request the assistance, and then Mr. Santry looks at the amount of money that's available and makes the decision as to how that money gets allocated. And we've done this in the past before. We've always had a little bit of scholarship money for families.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schoenbrini.
What is the percentage of kids that want to go but can't afford to go?
I don't really have that in. I'm not really privy to that information, so I'm not sure I could answer it, but I do believe in the past we've given anywhere from 5 to 10 scholarships out per year, but that's a guess. Mr. Santry would know better that perspective.
Is there a possibility to like figure out a way to make sure that everybody that wants to go gets to go?
That is a possibility. It might be above my pay grade, but it's certainly a possibility. I would love for every child who wants to go to be able to go on this trip. I just don't have enough information to be able to give a definitive answer on that.
Mrs. Kelly.
Excuse my ignorance on this, but my kids are younger, so I haven't been kind of involved in school field trips yet. Is there opportunities for students to fundraise to help pay for some of this, or how would that work?
I would imagine, based on the school, the guidelines of the district and the school regarding fundraising, it may be a possibility to do some sort of fundraiser. I would need more guidance on that, but I'd be absolutely willing to entertain that if that's something that is a possibility. Many schools do fundraise for this trip.
I remember selling poinsettias in high school to go to Italy. That's why I was asking.
Yep.
All right. All right, Mr. Bradmore.
Is there a, can you describe sort of the financial commitment that a family, you're going to be asking families to make? So there's a registration fee, there's some, upfront payments, whatever. Is that
Sure.
in the plan?
Sure, sure. So what the company does is, the school doesn't collect any money. We have absolutely nothing to do with any payments. Nothing comes to the school. We don't handle it. Families work directly with the provider, with the vendor. What they do is they require that $95 registration fee. And then very quickly, the payment plan is usually a certain amount of money over 6 months. We're starting later, so it would be likely a little bit of a higher amount over 5 months, potentially 4. The trip needs to be paid in full by approximately March 15th. So they need 60 days before for the trip to be paid in full, because that's when the hotels and the airlines, when they have to start booking everything. But there are payment plans optional for families to work with. Some families pay for the whole thing up front. That's for between the family and the vendor.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's a lot of information. That's a lot of work. It sounds like a wonderful trip. So what we would make the motion on is that we would need a motion. I would say, why don't we start with the motion for a 4-day trip to Washington, D.C., and to allow Mrs. Raboyne to figure out the transportation from the school to the airport, because that seems to be what's best to do. I don't think we can tie D-Bus into something when we don't know if they can do it. So if everyone is, unless somebody has a different motion, I would love to have somebody make that type of motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed 4-day trip as outlined to Washington, D.C. for the 8th grade, as outlined by Mrs. Raboyne. That's it.
All right.
Fine, I'll second that motion.
Okay, then we need a roll call vote. Oh, you're muted. Dr. Burnham, you're muted.
I'm muted.
You're muted. Usually me.
Mr. Schoenbrini,
Yes.
Mr. Beardmore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Archambault.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
I
Mrs.
appreciate your
Raboyne. This is
time.
very exciting. I know a kid that's looking forward to this.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we have the FY23 end of the year report. And I am sure that would be Mr. Cassidy.
That would be correct.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Cassidy, Business Manager again. In front of you tonight is the end of the year report. It was uploaded into the shared folder with the school committee. Admittedly, that report is not printer friendly. It has some very small type. I apologize for that. It's not my formatting, it's the state's formatting. It's really a report that is not printer friendly. What is the end of the year report? So the end of the year report is, I believe it was during the last meeting, I provided a report, a budget report on this year's budget and expenditures from last year's budget. So those amounts from the munis will go into the end of the year report. And it's broken down by building, every expenditure, salary and wages, insurance, capital improvements, transportation. And it goes into the state form. And within the state form, it calculates, it has its own calculations. So so if I may, I'm going to just kind of jump into sharing some screens here. So this is the first file, which kind of documents the expenditures by the school committee, the 21,649,288, and where those amounts go. It's very similar to the munis account that you saw a couple weeks ago. The difference is, for like a teacher's account or a paras account. It really totals, I'm trying to find that account. Sorry about that. Hold on.
It's okay. It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, it's a lot of numbers, but okay. So for example, teachers account. So it's over $9 million. That is not a number that you're going to see in Munis. That is a combination of all teachers throughout the district, regular ed and special ed. So all that information is put in, and it goes into an account. So I'm going to share another document. So the information is loaded into I guess the building by building account. So this is where you see those teachers. So in this location, at the primary school, this is the amount that we spent on teachers, regular ed teachers, and here's the amount for our special ed teachers. This is a data entry at every location. Munis amounts go right into here, and it's calculated into that first sheet that I gave you. In addition, this is a sheet. This is why I'm saying this is not very readable, but it really breaks down some of the other funding sources for the Title I money that we spent at the primary school for various things, ESSER money, other DESE grants. So there's a lot of detail, building by building. So the information is submitted into building by building, and then it's loaded into that first account. A lot of numbers, a lot of work. But a partner in completing this is Town Hall as well. So we get information from Town Hall on revenues and money that they've provided into the budget. So over and above what the town has provided or the school committee has provided, there are additional funds that the town, and I think this is a pretty important number, and I'm going to try to. They've documented an additional $6.8 million of services and expenses that's associated with running the school department. So those are some of the expenses that they take on, that they get credit on onto the foundation budget and in meeting the requirements at the state level. So I just wanted to highlight that. There's some additional information, additional forms in this report going to transportation, allocation of SPED funds, which is used for our meeting requirements on spending money toward special education students in the district. So there's a lot of information. I know some members, this might be the first time you're seeing this. I will be happy to answer any question that I can tonight. Obviously, if the school committee or the public has any questions around these numbers, I'd be happy to follow up with them. Pulling some of these numbers out, I know I did create this form and this document. I may not have some of that information right off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to get back to anybody. And I'll also say, if you want to look at this document over the next couple of weeks and connect with me, I'd be happy to follow up and provide some additional information to you. So what I'm asking the committee to do is vote on this and give the chairperson the authorization to sign the submission form. And this is a standard practice that we do in Lunenburg. So it'll be signed off by Karen Brochu, who's reconciled my total numbers. It'll be signed off by the superintendent of schools and then the chairperson of the school committee. So that is in front of you tonight. Once again, I'll take any questions that you may have about the process. If you have some questions about numbers, I will do the best job I can answering those. If not, I'll be happy to follow up and be honest with you and give you the number later.
Mr. Cassidy, thank you so much for putting this all together. What I did want to do is for the people in the public, we always say that these documents are on our website. And I had somebody say to me they had no idea how to get them. So I'm going to explain how to find them. So if you go to the school committee part of the website and you look under agendas and minutes, if you scroll down, you will see all the documents from all of our meetings, and they're organized by date. So you would look, if you were interested in this particular document, you would look under the October 19th date, and you would find this document on the website. Oh, thank you. The school committee section under meeting agendas and minutes, and scroll down, and there they are. So if those numbers are right there. So if that is what you are looking for, that is how you find it. Because I know it took me a while to figure out how to find it initially. So that is where they are hiding. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cassidy about all these numbers? I have to admit that I talked to him this afternoon. I said, I can't find the ESSER funds. Then I realized I was looking in the left-hand column instead of looking over, and it was so tiny, my old eyes were having trouble with it. But once he pointed it out, I could find it. So I thank him for that. Any questions? Mr. Beardmore?
Thank you for directing the public to that information, Mrs. Archambault. I've gotten that question myself and have had my own difficulty in finding information in the past. So we can't repeat that frequently enough, I don't think. So thank you for doing that. Mr. Cassidy, you had outlined a document submittal that you're looking for our approval on. Can you explain what that document is for, who it goes to, and what is the requirement that this is related to? I mean, we've effectively closed the books. I believe an audit is underway or was just completed at the town. Where does this document go and who receives it?
This is a DESE, Department of Secondary, Elementary and Secondary Education. This is not a town report. This is not a governor's report. This is strictly to DESE, and it really represents allocations per school, per student, making sure that the resources are being spent in meeting the foundation budget. Meeting the foundation budget is not a concern in Lunenburg. The town truly supports the school department and the education of students. So I say in some of the urban districts, it does become an issue. So it's making sure that those allocations are met. In addition, there's another calculation in here, which is meeting the meeting the requirements that the district spends on special ed students. And within this report, I wish I could show you, but we've met it, and the information kind of went away. But we have met the requirement this year, as we always have, of the portion of our budget that we spend. And when I say a portion of our budget, I'm specifically talking about any revolving account, local revolving account like circuit breaker, and the local budget. Those expenses meet or exceed what we have to spend on special ed students every single year. So it's kind of what's going to happen is If this is approved, I'll submit it on Friday morning. And we'll get audited as well. They'll come out, make sure that I put the numbers in the right place. And they have their checks and balances that they take a look at. And it's a going back and forth. Why did this account increase? Why did this one decrease? And it's just this kind of an internal reconciliation of how we spend our resources. And some of it is maybe a data entry, and some of it just may be a different practice that we're using in the district.
Okay.
Does that help?
So just for clarification, when it comes to the audit, so my understanding from hearing from Karen Brochu a week or two ago was that I think the town was about to go into or was in an audit with the DOR. Does the DOR look at our numbers as well as DESI looks at our numbers, or how, do you know how that works?
DOR, so the audit is done by an independent auditing firm, which has been chosen by DESI. So they will look at, I'm not really sure what kind of detail that the DOR goes through, but I know what DESI will look at our expenditures within Munis. And once again, where do those expenditures rest within the end of the year report? So there is an audit of the way we spend our money and how we fill out this report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Are there any other questions? Then could I have a motion to accept the end of the year report?
I move we accept the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beardmore. In a second, Mrs. Kelly,
I will second that.
and a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Schoenbrini,
Yes.
Mr. Beardmore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
Mrs. Archambault.
Yes.
Thanks again,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next on our agenda, and I see we have Mr. Jeffries joining us because we need to have a discussion about the town building use concepts. So, Mr. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me this evening. So the purpose of my attendance with you this evening is to go over, I'm here on behalf of the Lunenburg Municipal Building Design Committee, and the intent is to review the concepts that the committee has developed and come up with. So there are obvious implications on the school department, and so it's really important to us to get your feedback this evening, so that way I can relay that to the board. Mr. Beardmore has served on the board as a former member of the Finance Committee, and Mr. Leighton is also a current member representing the school committee on the board. So I suspect that that Brian can also help out with answering some of these questions. Is it possible, Carol, for me to also become co-host so that way I can share my screen?
I would think Dr. Burnham could take care of that.
Is
Or-
this
There we go.
is this a document you wanted to look at?
It is. I'd prefer to, if it's okay for me to share, I have it in a same format, but it's not in a PDF, it's in the actual document, so we can scroll across a little easier.
You should be set, I think.
I see. All right. So let me go ahead and pull this up and just let me know when you can see this, okay?
That's fine.
Perfect. All right. So, one of the things that the committee has already decided, and we sent a communication over, is that we're looking for a reduction in storage space overall. And so first we want to thank the superintendent for her analysis on that allows for a reduction in that space. So presenting these concepts. So, the charge of the committee, based on what the charge of the committee was to come up with three, or not three, but different permutations of a concept or a plan for how we're going to resolve our building needs in the center of town. And so the approach that also having different cost implications. The approach that the committee took was to kind of take three different unique concepts in which town hall is identified in a different area, And then in the end, we came up with a hybrid concept, which is the one that I think we prefer. So I'm just going to walk through these concepts, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the hybrid concept. So in concept number one, the thought here is to use TC Passios as a future town hall. That would be demolishing the north wing, renovating the kitchen and gym, and keeping PAC. So when you drive by the building and you look at it, you know, from the front side, it would look the same, and the middle section in this plan would be there, but that north wing closest to the middle high school is the area that would be removed. Current town hall in this plan would, and in most of these plans, would function as a community building in which we are preserving the second floor, and then utilizing the rest of the building for some form of meeting rooms. The school administrative offices would be relocated to the Ritter building, with the understanding that there would need to be renovations to that building. So that way installing a new HVAC system, and then also making sure that walls go from the floor to the ceiling as requested by superintendent. Brooks House would be sold or demolished. 30 School Street, which is a location for the current primary school, that would function as some form of green space. And then, you know, our last three columns here are just kind of the other notes that we have. So in order for concept number one to work, all school programs, which is we are excluding ACE from this conversation. The assumption is that ACE will stay with the school administrative offices, because that key personnel that runs that program, we understand is part of the district staff. But all other programs would be relocated back into the schools. The other considerations that we have are, you know, we need to know better what the cost related to PAC studios are. You know, this would have a duplicate control rooms, and you know, and then also looking at that lot and subdividing that lot. ANR's approval not required, but it refers to the subdivision of land. The cost implications here that we know that we'll have a significant renovation of the TC Passios. There's going to be a renovation to Ritter to add those floor to ceiling walls that we just discussed, with privacy and some form of a drop ceiling, and then also hazardous material abatement unknown at the Brooks House, and we know again at the Ritter that there's going to be significant HVAC implications. Concept number two focuses town hall at the Ritter building. So TC Passios then would function, would continue to be utilized for school programs, and then also function as a transition space. And what we mean by that is all of this would happen in phases. And so as an example, you know, if the renovation is occurring in town hall, we would need to relocate those staff. And so the TC Passios would function as that transition space while buildings are renovated, and those staff in those buildings need to be relocated. And then you know, also in this concept, it would reserve that property for a future Turkey Hill potentially, which then would be the property would go back under the care and custody of the school committee. At current town hall, similar to concept number one, same exact thing as concept number one. No change there. And then the Ritter building, again, that would function as a new town hall with an annex to Ritter for town offices. And the assumption here is that school administration and town offices would be co-located. The Brooks House, the concepts that we had for that, to lease it to some form of a business, or you know, lease as a house, that, you know, potential PAC studio, demolish, convert to an athletic building, some kind of senior thing, boys and girls club. We're kind of all over the place in this concept, really identifying all the potential uses for the building. None of them, though, we identified as preferential. 30 School Street would function as green space, and then we note parking here because there would need to be an expansion of the parking lot to accommodate for town hall, the town hall annex to the Ritter building. The other considerations that we have here is that we haven't identified a location for PAC, that we would be eliminating the community gym, which is a critical need for the senior community. Again, duplicate control room. There's no food pantry in this plan, which is a vital service that we would lose within a town building. And then also, as I noted, the TC Passios parcel would convert back over to school custody and control. Cost implications similar to concept number 1 with the hazardous material abatement unknown at the Brooks House. Any kind of use of the Brooks House will require some significant renovations. We know that we would need to patch the roof at the Turkey Hill at the TC Passios building in order to be able to continue those transitional uses. And then also that remodel of the first floor of Town Hall, Ritter expansion as well. Concept number 3 puts Town Hall at 30 School Street. So TC Passios would function similarly as a transition space. And then once the designs on the buildings were complete, then we would look to convert that over to a community center in which we would demolish the north and central wings and potentially part of the west wing for the purpose of the building maintaining the gym and the cafeteria and the kitchen. And then in the west wing of that front portion of the building, a small office for potentially facility staff, town staff, and some community rooms. That's where the pantry would be relocated there as well. Town Hall in this concept would also function as the similar to concepts numbers 1 through 3, no change there. Ritter building, same as concept number 1, would be used for school administrative offices. Brooks House in this concept would be utilized for town storage or the facilities department. As noted, 30 School Street would be the location for a new town hall. And then in the other, this concept also, again, similar to 1, requires school programs excluding ACE to be relocated back into the schools and or Ritter. Cost implications from this plan related to the PAC studio, again, potentially a duplicate control room, subdividing the land. And then, it may provide additional fields of parking when those portions of the TC Passios building are demolished, that space could be utilized for additional parking and fields to benefit the schools. And then the cost implications here, again, hazardous material abatement unknown at the Brooks House. We know that there will be some engineering triggers, and we would want to try to avoid level 3. Just as a side note, I know that you guys are not all property professionals here. There's, when you hit 30% of a building value or roughly touch 50% of the structure, you're required to meet the current building code. And so when we were looking at the costs for the plan to renovate the TC Passios, we were looking at, I believe we were at $11 million, somewhere between 8 and 11. At those numbers, what difference does it make? But somewhere between $8 and $11 million were just the code upgrades. And so that's something that in this iteration we're trying to avoid. But again, the cost implications there are Ritter renovation, remodeling the first floor of the town hall, and then again, Brooks House, any kind of renovation at Brooks House that would need to be undertaken. So those were the 3 initial concepts we came up with. Each concept has some form of a flaw in which it's not necessarily ideal. And so what we did then was we looked at these 3 concepts, again, the goal being unique and individual uses for every building. And then looking at them from those lenses, we pulled together what we think makes the most sense. And we're calling this the hybrid concept. And so in this hybrid concept, the TC Passios would function as a transition space and then become a community center. That the north and central wings would be demolished, potentially part of the west wing, that we would create a small office space there if needed for facilities department, also town clerk storage, voting machines, etc. We would keep the food pantry, and that would be relocated to the west wing of the building. Would renovate the commercial kitchen to make that available to the public, and we would maintain the gym. In the west wing, we would also locate a PAC studio, and we need to have a better understanding of what those cost contributions from PAC will be. And then in the portion of the building that's demolished, which would be, again, the central and north wings of the TC Passios, we would provide in this plan public bathrooms that would help facilitate some of the activities that go on the athletic fields, and also additional parking to help support some of the activities that go on the athletic fields. Town Hall in this concept, it's a little bit more robust than the previous, in which we would convert Town Hall to being a meeting house. A meeting house is the traditional New England form of where governments happened before there were town halls. And so in this idea, the first floor would be renovated to be able to have 3 meeting rooms. And the second floor, we would remove what's currently the town manager's office, the HR office, to increase the size of the room back to its original size. And then that second floor meeting room would continue to be used. So essentially all town meetings would occur at the meeting house. And that would be a decrease in usage, and part of that idea was to prolong the lifespan of the building, that, you know, if it's continued to be used, that would be important. The Ritter Building, the idea here is to have in the Ritter Building to utilize the second floor and the basement for school admin and ACE. So again, what's currently the Ritter Building, not the planning office area, but the rest of the building, that would become school administrative offices, and again, a potential home for the ACE program. And then, you know, our thought right now is that we would put the annex kind of in front of Ritter, not necessarily on the side, but you know, those things can change in time. But the idea here was that we would utilize the what's currently the planning office area as kind of the bridge between the two buildings. Brooks House, we felt pretty strongly about demolishing or selling. We know APDC is not going to support that, but that is, I think, what we all thought was really the best case for that building. 30 School Street would become green space and again, additional parking to accommodate the relocation of Town Hall over to the parcel with Ritter. And then the other implications, again, are the same. And you're seeing the pattern here that all of these plans heavily depend upon school programs not having dedicated space in a building, and for them to be relocated back over into the schools. Other considerations here, we know that, you know, we don't know the cost of what PAC will contribute. You know, we think that we might eliminate the duplicate control room. Again, you know, we noted require A&R for subdivision of lot. That may be for the Brooks House if that goes back to being a school purpose. But overall, the TC Pastiles parcel will remain town property. Cost implications here is that, you know, significant renovation of all buildings in some form, and hazardous material abatement, again, unknown at the Brooks House. This would require us to still patch the roof of the TC Pastiles to be able to utilize it as that transition space. Then again, as the to utilize it as that transition space, and then as a community center. And then as similarly, you know, explained previously, you know, remodeling the first floor of Town Hall. We know that the building is going to need engineering support. It's going to need some sprinklers. And then we were looking at a slightly larger expansion to the Ritter Building of about 4,000 square feet in this concept. So before I'm going to stop sharing here and just provide a couple of additional comments. So one of the things that that we identified as really important is that there's two buildings, you know, Town Hall and Ritter Building, that there's a lot of emotional attachment towards. And so part of our plan was to make sure that those two buildings specifically continue to be utilized. The other thing, and this is the implications on school programs, that we did meet with the superintendent several times previously to talk about, you know, the benefits or disadvantages of having students in a school in which the same space is used for classroom instruction, and then also utilized for kind of, you know, more relaxed playtime in some ways, and the challenges that kids are going to have being able to transition from one mindset to the other. I think we all understood that, and we get it. I think the struggle is that right now, renovating space is being priced in the $250 to $325 price range, and new space is in the $350 plus, and that's per square foot price range. So when we're looking at, you know, the need of about 3,000 to 4,000 square feet that would only be utilized, you know, we're talking millions of dollars. And so I think the general thought was that if there's a way, you know, another analysis that we also did was we looked at school districts that, you know, we took a list of the school districts in Massachusetts based on MCAS scores to see kind of who those top districts are. And then we did a little bit of research into those districts to see where their before and after school programs are located. And just about all of them were located in schools. And so there didn't seem to be a strong correlation against having the programs located in schools. Again, when we looked at the top districts in the Commonwealth, that was a commonality that the after school and before school programs were located in schools. And it by them being the top districts, I think we deduce that whatever that impact is on student learning, that it must be minimal enough to not justify millions of dollars in construction costs. So I think that we understand that that's going to be kind of a sticking point for the superintendent and perhaps for the remainder of the school committee. And we hope that additional space will be considered in a future TC Passios. I will also offer just one additional comment, which is, I think that we are in a mindset in which all schools need to be located in the center of town. And I would encourage an expansion of that mindset, that we have parcels located all around our town that could suffice for a future school. And I would hope that in any future school planning process, that those parcels are considered. Some of those parcels are pretty substantial in size. Some are 40 acres, some are 60 acres. And we have them again in different locations around town. We also have a 111 acre parcel that's located a little bit off town center. And so, we don't want to box the Turkey Hill project in, but we do want to just note that there may be alternative locations other than TC Passios for a future Turkey Hill expansion. So with that, that's the presentation, those are the ideas. And so what we're looking for here from the members is the kind of your initial reactions to that. I know we did send that in an email, and then also your feedback, things for us to consider as we move forward. And again, I just want to note that the hybrid concept is the one that we are the most interested in moving forward with.
You're muted, Carol. Carol, you're muted.
Carol, yeah.
I told you I do that all the
Yeah,
time.
it's just a matter
Sorry.
of time.
Yep, this is going to happen eventually. Thank you and to the committee for the hard work in putting all this together. I have a lot of comments I want to make, but I'm going to let the committee go first, but I am going to speak to one thing. The comments about the correlation between MCAS and the location of the daycare. I would wonder if those communities had more space for the kids, and I'll show you what I mean. I do know of a community that has higher MCAS scores than ours, that does house their extended day program in their school. And the children go between the auditorium, the cafeteria, and the gym. And they rotate around. We don't have that kind of space. If the schools don't have the auditorium piece, and if we were to use the gymnasiums, then those town programs that use the gymnasiums would be eliminated. And using classrooms is difficult because there's extremely confidential information in classrooms, and to have kids in there, you can't do. So my thought, I just want to talk about that. I just wanted to make that point, and I'll go back to that afterwards. But I did want to make the point about those differences in communities. So I would take comments from the committee, and then I'll wrap up with mine afterwards. Mr. Schoenbrini?
First of all, thank you for putting all that together. I like the idea of having it a hybrid. One question I have is that there are 10 individuals in the town of Lunenburg that are obligated to register where they live and where they work. The models that put town services close to schools, would they be in compliance with federal, state, and local regulations regarding sufficient distances for these people?
The answer, that's a good question, Anthony. I appreciate you bringing that up. So there are often exceptions. And so the first answer is yes, in terms of distance from the schools, that we don't have that concern. The second thing is that, municipal office locations usually are exempt from some of those restrictions that, people have to come into municipal offices from time to time. I think that we've wrestled with this question because we've heard many members of the community express concern about the proximity of the TC Passios to the schools. What I would argue and say is TC Passios is right next to a senior center already, has always been. And it's right in front of a library. These are public places, and we have never had an incident in our recent history of anyone going to conduct town business and then also having some implication on the schools. I think it's also somewhat a misunderstanding of how a lot of these things happen. That, I think the concern a lot is children being molested or being touched. The data shows that most of the time that it's people that in your family or friends, and it doesn't often happen in the middle of a school day with hundreds of adults around. And so, the schools are also locked buildings. You can't just walk in there and grab a kid. So I think that there are concerns about proximity, and I think we overcome those concerns with what's currently in place for school security. And then also we're talking the times of use. That in the model, the hybrid concept, the community center, typically the community would be utilizing the building at night after the school day, and that who would be using it during the day would be the seniors who are already using it during the day. And so we don't see there really being a crossover or any kind of negative impact with the community use, because again, it would just be commercial kitchen, food pantry, and pack studio.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Beardmore?
I have a couple of questions and a number of comments, so please bear with me. Mr. Jeffries, you said the word phase a couple of times, and I'm curious, with in particular the hybrid, because you've determined that that's kind of where your leanings are. What's the timeline of these phases that you have in mind?
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer on that for you, Peter. We don't, I think that as a next step, I think once we identify and solidify the concepts, the next step is to work through what that construction process would look like. We need to have a better understanding of what is required for engineering support in the buildings, what's required for HVAC, kind of what those lead times are. And then once we have more data, I think then we'll be able to lay out this phased approach.
Do you have any inkling what this plan is going to cost?
No. No. However, I'm in this field. I can take an educated guess. I don't like to throw numbers out there unnecessarily, but we're operating under the mindset that our ceiling is never going to be higher than $20 million. And so that, I think, has been kind of our mindset as we've worked through this, is that we're looking at, we know that we have a ceiling here that we're up against. So, where we see the costs as, a new build, we can calculate out 4,000 square feet by $350 a square foot. And we know what that dollar amount is. And then we know, in the Ritter building, again, I think the changes are to the HVAC system there. And then also, some minor interior renovations to bring those walls to the ceiling or install a drop ceiling. That's going to be $1 million renovation project by itself. The town hall, the intent is to shore up the building. The building has engineering problems, structural concerns. And so we don't have an idea of what that's going to cost at all. And so we really need to, that's where I think we're the most blind. And the approach that we're taking with TC Passios is, our intent is to be able to renovate that first portion of the building while leaving the rest of the building still standing. So that way demolition happens last. And what we want to try to do is avoid hitting these level 3 triggers. We want to avoid hitting more than 50%, 30% of the building value, and want to avoid hitting more than 50% of the building. And we believe that we will be able to realize some cost savings by doing that. and then tearing the building down, the portion that we don't need down after those renovations occur. And so we have a rough estimate for what those will cost based on previous work that we've done. But part of our planning at this point is that we would not want to relocate any walls at all inside of the TC Passios, really keep the footprint exactly the same, and come up with new uses for what's in those buildings. So it's less of a serious renovation than what we were previously proposing. And so we're hoping to realize some cost savings there.
Do you think that you're going to hit, or is there a possibility of hitting any triggers with Ritter with respect to renovation?
It's possible, yes. Yep. But the goal there is to work with, we would need to work with the superintendent and this board to identify what your needs are in that building. And I think you already know we're going to do everything we can to avoid hitting any kind of triggers.
Well, what I'm getting to is not really, extending walls up to the ceiling. What I'm getting to is putting a 4,000 square foot doing a 4,000 square foot expansion onto that building, and your 1/3 of value trigger. In my mind, I mean, I went to Lunenburg schools, so I think we're.
Yeah,
my understanding of fractions is we're over that 30%. So.
So what would happen in that case, Peter, is that, it would be a separate building and there would be a bridge.
Okay.
And so you won't, the renovation, the town hall annex, based on our understanding, again, our property and professional experience, is that we would be building a new building and then building a connection for that new building.
Okay, fair enough. I didn't grasp that. So thank you very much.
Can I just add to that? So there's an additional concern with the Ritter building too, that the APDC would have to be involved in that as well, any renovations or changes.
Which,
And obviously, whatever we do here is going to have the support of the town. And
correct.
I would remind everybody that the town has retained override authority over the APDC. So, I don't want to jump to that conclusion. I think that their input, it will be valuable here, but it is what it is. A few comments, and again, bear with me. So first of all, I think that it is imperative that we make progress here. And I think that, we've kind of gotten our feet stuck in the mud for a few years, and we've got to figure out how to move forward. And I think that you and the committee have done exactly what, again, I said this almost exactly a year ago, you fulfilled your charge last time, and I think you're fulfilling your charge again this time. And I commend you and the members of the committee for doing that. However, I think that this is going to require compromise, and not everybody is going to get everything that they want. My king for a day scenario is completely out the window already. We're not going to take care of the dilapidated eyesore in front of the public safety building and solve our secondary egress and put municipal office buildings there, I guess, which is fine. I'm okay with that. But I think that what we're about to identify are some issues that we need to work through. And frankly, and I'll discuss this with the committee later, I think we probably need to kind of go through a workshop meeting to really kind of take this in, consolidate our comments, and probably come back with a response on behalf of the committee. I know I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I want to focus on 3 areas: finance, time, and space. Finance. So at the request of the finance committee, the town finance director and our financial consultants came back, and it was presented to the finance committee last Thursday, an analysis of the town's debt capacity. And it's a long discussion, but basically our borrowing capacity is $42 million over the next 10 years. And there's a couple of different scenarios, including a borrowing in 2024 and a borrowing in 2034, and one scenario where there's 3 borrowings spread out over that 10-year period. But nevertheless, the total isn't any different. It's $42 million of borrowing capacity over the course of the next 10 years. An analysis was done 2 years ago on the replacement value of Turkey Hill Middle School. And at that time, in 2026 dollars, it would be $36,348,862. That's in 2026. If you add another 6 or 7 or 8 years to that, you're up well over $40 million. This does not include the inflation spike that we saw over the course of the last 3 years. We're probably well over that $40 million now. And we need to go back and redo those numbers and do a new analysis on the part of the school department to figure out what the replacement or renovation projection would be if we're looking at a 2030 to 2032 timeline. The net is even if you figure in a 50% reimbursement from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, we're going to be cutting it super close, if not going over, in my estimation. So, you know, and I've heard you many times, Mr. Jeffries, talk about servicing all, not just the students, but the entire population. I understand that, but the net is that, you know, we've spent the last 20 years borrowing and catching up on 30 years from 1970 really to 2000 that our buildings were completely neglected. And the reason why TC Passios is in the condition that it's in, and the reason why Turkey Hill is you know, getting to be old is that for a 30-year period, those buildings were not maintained at all. And largely the school department has dealt with that. When this, let's get to time. I'll stop belaboring finance. I'm worried that these phasing scenarios are not going to put us in a position where we're dealing with Turkey Hill in 2032, but we're going to be dealing with Turkey Hill in 2042 or 2052. I understand how these things work, how things get backed up, how the economy changes, how the political winds change. And I'm concerned that we cannot just make a single decision, move forward with that, and then make another decision in 5 or 6 years around Turkey Hill. It's just a concern that I have. And, you know, there might be plenty of money because our borrowing capacity will be greater, but we'll have just spent the last 20 or 30 years educating students in a building that is falling in on itself, or we'll go out and spend $14 to $20 million on maintenance of that building. Currently, there's $14 million slated in the capital plan for that building over the next 10 years that I prefer not to spend. So there's a lot of ramifications to a elongated period of time. And the last is space. So I appreciate you kind of throwing out the topic you and I spoke about last weekend about alternative properties. And I do think that that's something that should be explored. But in my view, to be really frank with you, it's a red herring right now. My personal hypothesis is that the town really likes the campus. It's said it many times. And until the town says that something else is okay, I'm inclined to believe that it's not. And I think that if we're going to move forward with that assumption, we have a lot of work to do to prove that out, because I'm not ready to take that leap. If going off campus is not okay, the hybrid scenario puts a boat anchor in the middle of what was formerly our campus, and it does box in Turkey Hill. And the scenarios are: we renovate Turkey Hill over a 2 to 3 year period and sentence children who aren't born yet to 2 years of living in portables and going between classes on, 2x8 planks in the winter. Or we build a new Turkey Hill in that back field that, to be honest with you, I'm skeptical is buildable space. And so I'm very skeptical right now, considering the needs of Turkey Hill. And then the final point that I'll make is around programming. And I understand your point around the after-school program. As it turns out, DESE doesn't require that schools even have an after-school program. By the way, DESE also doesn't, or nobody in the state requires that we have a community kitchen, doesn't require that we have space for pickleball. There are no requirements for any of this. And what's happened over the course of the last 10 years or so is that we've had this, what I prefer to call closet space, because as we all know, when we have excess closet space in our houses, we find ways to fill those closets. And we've expanded our services beyond our capacity as a town. And I view childcare to not be a school issue. I view it to be a community issue. And you can say you're going to push it back on the schools, and that's fine. But when the cost goes up and the capacity and the quality goes down, Pete Beardmore is going to share that responsibility with Michael Ray Jeffries. I can assure you of that, and every other member of this community, because this is a community issue. The reason why parents can afford to live in Lunenburg and also be parents is that they can go to work from about 7 in the morning until about 5 at night. It is a community issue, and we need to start thinking about it that way. And I'll step down off I think we have work to do here. Thank you.
Peter, I appreciate those comments. I will be sure to bring them back to the board. I do have a couple of responses to them, as I'm sure you figured I would.
I'm sure.
So, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I think that there is an element of politics here, and I want to speak to the politics. So, you know, the problem that we're having is what to do with old schools, and I want to be clear about that. That, you know, TC Passios, the old primary school, the Brooks House, these are all properties that were under the school care and custody that were transferred to the town without a plan. And so it's really important for the school committee, when you're thinking about a new school, to have a plan for what's going to happen with the old one. That needs to be part of the discussion, and it needs to be part of the cost. That if these things were resolved when new schools were built, I think we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. And this would be a lot easier. You know, the other part of that is, you know, when we look at our budget, 52% of our budget goes to the school system. When we look at our debt, you know, in roughly, I think it's 2 to 3 years, 100% of our debt will be school debt. You know, our town has to do more than just educate children. And so, you know, I understand that I'm speaking to the group that's responsible for educating kids, and I don't want to take anything away from what you're doing, but I think the data shows that we are spending a significant amount of money on the education of children, way above and beyond what the state requires. That the town has been consistently there for the education of children, and I don't expect that to change, and I don't think that my intent here or anyone's intent is to change that dynamic. That is one of the values of Lunenburg, is that we are heavily invested in the education of children. And that's the value that we give to all of our residents, and we all are committed to continuing that value. What I'm saying is that, you know, we need to do something else too. That can't be all that we do. And when you look at the other aspects of our community, you know, when I became a selectman, what shocked me was, you know, we had repairs needed at the library, and that they relied on donated funds to get a building we hadn't even paid off, and they needed donated funds to get the building. You know, you know, when we do comp analysis of, you know, where our employees stack up compared to other communities, you know, we're aware that the teachers are often in the higher tier, but our staff are generally in the bottom third. Compared to comparable communities. That we have made a significant investment in the education of children, and we also have to invest in other things. So with that understanding, I hope that there can be creative solutions to prolong the life of Turkey Hill Elementary School. You know, one of the concepts that we did explore was, you know, what if we take over that building? That for our purposes, it's one of the nicest buildings that's around. You know, it needs the least amount of work, and I think there was general agreement that building would work really well for a lot of the purposes that we're looking for. The problem is that it doesn't resolve TC Passios, it doesn't resolve Town Hall, it doesn't resolve Ritter, it doesn't resolve Brooks House, and then I think we were also concerned about the amount of demolition that we would need to do. That you know, demolition and new construction. So the thought behind the hybrid concept was to minimize new construction wherever we can. but I do agree with you that there is going to be an impact on the 10-year plan to have a new school. And that, you know, if we spend $20 million or $25 million on municipal needs, that doesn't leave a lot of money left over for a new school. And we know that we can assume that a new school is going to be $40 to $50 million or more, that we would probably utilize the entire capacity just on that new school alone. And so I think that what I'm looking for from the school committee in part is agreement and partnership, that acknowledgement that the town has made a lot of contributions here, and saying, look, we need you to not to push Turkey Hill so hard so that way we can get other things done. And it's not due to a lack of commitment here. It's that, you know, people are emotional voters. Anything involving children, you're going to have the support for. There will never be a day in which the town will not support a new school that's needed. But there has been hundreds of years where the town has not supported the municipal needs of our community because of the cost. And so I want to make sure, I think everyone's interest here is making sure that we're moving forward in a way that isn't, you know, putting our kids in a negative position, but utilizing existing resources in a better way. And then with the note about the programming for the after school and before school program, Peter, I agree with you. I think that it is a community issue, that we have, and this is not a school issue, that we have a responsibility to make sure that the people who live in our community can get to their jobs. You know, people come from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds. Not everyone has a two-family household. You know, we have single parents who live in town. We have grandparents who are raising their grandkids. That there's a lot of variety that justifies the necessity of those programs. What we've heard in our meetings is a mixed result, to be honest with you, that we don't have public support 100% behind the idea of the town providing dedicated space for the after school and before school program. And part of this is understanding that, you know, 29% of our town are seniors. And seniors, you know, and people are living longer lives than they've lived before. And I know I've said this before, I don't want to get too much on my soapbox here, but one of the things that people have said is that their taxes now are higher than their mortgage ever was. And so, you know, one of the things that we have to be concerned with is that senior who bought a home who bought a home in Lunenburg when they were in their late 20s or 30s, you know, 50 years ago, who've only lived in this community, who've paid their taxes over all this time, and who want to die here. And so we have to be mindful of the cost implications for those people. And the senior community, I think a lot of people look back on their own lifespans and say, my kids went to an after school program right inside the school. It was right in, you know, and now my kids are doing fine. Why do these new kids need to be in a new dedicated space? That is a hard argument to overcome. And when it comes to, again, the politics, you know, how do we get people to vote for thousands of square feet of space that is only utilized for 4 to 5 hours a day? I think the logical, to me, answer to that, or where we're at in the committee is that, you know, a lot of the people who run these programs, who are involved in this, you know, they're also involved in the educational realm. And so, you know, what I would like to see is that when we do that renovation of Turkey Hill, we understand that the state's not going to contribute a significant amount of money or any money to anything that's not educationally based. But I would hope that when you're building a new expansion, that we also can build out this new space as part of that plan, and that there might be opportunities to share some space, that some things that are utilized during the school day that aren't a classroom, that they could function perhaps for the before school and after school program. But ultimately, you know, co-locating that with the schools just seems to be the better option for the community. Decreases cost to shuffle the kids back and forth. You know, it gives kind of those parents one location to drop them off at. So I think from my perspective as a selectman and also as a member, and I can't be this long-winded on all these answers here, but from my perspective, you know, I think the Turkey Hill project is the project to figure out kind of what that space will look like. And I agree with you that TC Passios has functioned in many ways as a closet, but we can't exclude the after-school program from being part of that closet. That, you know, if the space wasn't there, where would this be? In a school.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Is there anyone else with a question?
Or comment.
or comment, of course. Mrs. Kelly,
Just correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we previously look into the Ritter building for possibly housing the school administration and the ACE program, and we determined that it wasn't a big enough space? I could be completely remembering this wrong, but Dr. Burnham, I don't know if you could clarify that, or Carol.
Dr. Burnham, would you like to clarify that?
We did look at that, and it will be a really tight fit for us, and it would require some build out of office space. But we had, when we looked at it, looked at the entire building. And it sounds like in some of these concepts, we may not have the entire building to build out office space. So I'd have to know a little bit more about what space we would actually have access to, as to whether or not we could fit everything there. We may not be able to.
So I can add to that as well, Dr. Burnham. So we looked at we did look at the space requests from the superintendent previously. And the amount of space available is more than what those requests were. So it seems as if it will fit just fine. And then also it's the entire building. So that in the concepts that look at the school admin offices, the hybrid concept would remove the planning board area from the building, but it would keep in, the second floor and basement level. And again, right now we have a conference room in that basement level that could become potentially 2 more offices as well. So as we recall, most of the primary concerns was about student privacy, and that the building in its current condition is not a building that the school department can move into. And so there would need to be renovations, and that's all related to HVAC. The reason why the walls don't go to the ceiling is because when we renovated the building, we didn't want to put in a new HVAC system, or rather we didn't want to pay for it. And so we kept the HVAC system the same. We put in some mini splits throughout the building. And then kept the walls short so that way air could move, and that would be resolved. So the intent, Dr. Burnham, would be to as we move forward with the concepts, to make sure that we're coming back to you to review all this, so that way we're working with you to come up with what this floor plan looks like. And right now we're saying that we think that you're not going to need the planning board office, but maybe you will. And so maybe that's additional square footage that we need to provide in the floor plan, and not use that as the bridge to the new building, and create a different bridge.
Thank you. Anyone else before I put in my 2 cents? Okay. Sorry, I might be lengthy. I wholeheartedly appreciate the work that went into these plans, and I really hope one of these plans gets adopted. We have been kicking around buildings for so long in this community. I would really like something to work here. There's a few points I want to make, though, and I believe that it is the intent of the committee that no entity, no community use of any building in town be eliminated. We're keeping the food pantry, we're keeping the PAC, we're keeping all those things. And the one program I have not heard anything about is the Early Learning Center. And this program, as best I can tell, would need to be eliminated. This program serves preschool students during the day, and it acts as daycare. And these parents depend on this program for their students for daycare during the day. We can't put it in the school because the schools are filled with school-age children. There's no place to put this particular program. So I haven't heard anybody mention this. I've listened to a lot of meetings. I just want to make sure that you are aware that this program would be eliminated, because we can't put it anywhere. There's no place to go. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that. The parents would need to find the daycare arrangements. And as I wholeheartedly agree with Peter, I had put it in all my wordy notes here, that daycare is in fact a community issue. So we are partners in that, obviously. We care about the kids, we care about the families, and we care about these kids too. And we don't know where these kids would be during the day or how the parents would maneuver this particular problem. With the extended day, I already talked about that, but basically, with the extended day moving back, we don't have the options other schools have. Communities with better MCAS scores, for the most part, not completely, are wealthier communities, and their school buildings have more multipurpose rooms. We don't have that in our elementary schools. If the schools, the programs went back into the schools, and I don't have a big problem with that, but once again, there's going to be some parents that don't get the daycare they're used to getting, because you cannot safely have that amount of kids in a cafeteria all afternoon. Safely, it doesn't work. You have to be able to move them. They have to be able to make choices. They've been concentrating all day, and they're little guys. It's the little guys you worry about. You know, your older kids, well, they wouldn't be in the daycare, but the little guys that are like second grade or so, they work really hard to hold it together all day, and they get to extended day and they need to let out some steam. You can't have kids letting out steam if they're all in the cafeteria, particularly if you have some kids that have sensitivity to sensory overload. That's a sensory overload nightmare, and we have no place to put them. So that's why we are struggling with this. It is not because we don't want the kids in the school. It is because we would have to cut the numbers, and we're going to leave community members with no daycare, and that we feel bad about. And but once again, daycare is a community problem. DESE doesn't license our daycare. So, but we do want it to work. We want these families to have a place for these kids to be. The other issue that Peter also brought up is the debt capacity and the planning. The $20 million that will be freed up in FY24. If the AC in the 20-year-old primary building was $7 million, I don't know how all these other renovations are going to be done for 20 million. You're better at that than I am. Obviously, that is your job. My job has always been about kids. You're into buildings. Maybe you know something I don't. I hope you do, because I really want this to work. I really want this community to figure this out. And if there is a viable option, I will be there championing it, because I think it's very important. But as we look at that debt capacity to get moving out and all, we look at Turkey Hill. And when you and I talked about Turkey Hill, I said, absolutely, we're not jumping the queue. Absolutely, we will not. I believe that day, and I believe it today. But I want you to know what I believe the consequences are of waiting longer than the 3 or 4 years we had talked about. If we wait longer than that, it is like walking on thin ice. You're skating on thin ice, and you don't know when the whole thing is going to let go and you're going to fall into the pond. You have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody else does, and they probably don't work anyways. So we don't know when that building is going to let go. And it is at some point. And the teacher in me, the nurturer in me says 8, 9, and 10-year-old children are only 8, 9, and 10-year-old once. That's it. They can't redo grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. We learned that through COVID. We knew that anyways. There's no redos with young kids. If they're in that building, let's say we're out to, I don't know, 2029, 2030, and we're hanging in there waiting because, as Mr. Beardmore says, we don't want to spend, I wrote down the number, it was ridiculous, $1 millions and millions and millions of dollars to go into a building that we're going to renovate, or we're going to rebuild, or whatever it is we end up doing. So we're out there with these kids, and all of a sudden, the HVAC fails. And there are no parts. And there's nothing we can do. And it's January. Where do we put the kids? What do we do? So the town then has to help us out and find some space, because we don't have it. Sure, maybe we can put some of the kids at the middle high school, maybe, but we can't put all of them. So we scurry. We find some portable classrooms, or we find some other community that for some reason, as we helped Fitchburg a few years ago, they can help us out for a little while. And the kids are all disjointed. They don't get that time back. And that's the part that pulls at me. We don't know when this is all going to crash. So I understand the phased part of this. And I also understand that I can't imagine how government functions if you don't phase it. You know, if you decide to go in to the town hall first, and, you know, you can't do all these buildings at once. People have to be working somewhere. Town government has to function. But I guess my point is, I understand we're at the end of the queue. But if the ice lets go before we get there, we need the assurance that the town is going to help us out on this, and that we're going to find a way for these kids not to lose a year, 2 years of education because the HVAC failed, the electrical system blew up, whatever it is that goes wrong, because we all know that stuff could go wrong there. So my point is, I guess, my big point in saying this is, yeah, we're next in line, and we understand that, and we will wait in the queue. But the queue has to keep moving. It can't stall out. So if we get to town meeting, and for some reason the town decides they don't vote one of these things in, and I really hope they do, but if they don't, we have to start making noise, because we can't have kids in a building that breaks. And none of us know when that's going to happen. So that is the point I want to make. And I would like you to bring back to the committee that, please, just get this done quickly, because I don't think that building can wait 10 years out. I'm not a building expert, you are. But it makes me very nervous. I get nervous with kids in a building with no sprinklers. I get nervous that the whole heating system could go, because that's not going to be good. So that's my comment.
Well, Carol, I appreciate that comment. I will definitely bring that back to the committee, and I'll offer you tonight just a couple of words.
Mhm.
So, you know, you mentioned that Turkey Hill is looking at $14 million in renovations. My advice is to proceed and do them. Peter just shook his head. No, I must have heard that wrong. You want to correct me, Peter?
Well, the clarification was these are not renovations. These are upgrades to existing systems, some of which might be very disruptive. So for example, my understanding, I did a tour of Turkey Hill recently. The boilers are okay. They're fairly recent, I believe. It's the plumbing and the blowers in the classrooms and all those kinds of things, right? There's dollars associated with that. There's the roof. There's the electrical panels. There's this year the capital plan request this year includes the fire alarm system, because we had a critical failure within the last several months in the fire alarm system. So there's $14 million projected over the next 10 years that are not renovations. They're replacements of systems that are due to fail.
And just one other point on that, the $14 million, if you look at that capital plan, any place that has an asterisk, and almost all of those Turkey Hill projects do, that would be the town cost, assuming MSBA is going to reimburse some of that. If we take any money from MSBA, we are now committing that building to be a school for 10 more years.
Yeah. And in my opinion, I think that, so in my professional world, something I say all the time, and I'll be very transparent and say that I have a consistent problem communicating this message to people who are not property professionals. And my success rate is very low and being able to get others to understand what I mean. But I'm going to try again here today. And hopefully someone, like I said, I know my past is not very good with getting this to stick. Buildings need to be maintained all the time, period. And when you identify that you need to put a new roof on, put a new roof on. Even if you don't know what your future plans are in that building, the best building management practices are to do everything you can to maintain the buildings. I'm going to talk about Turkey Hill for a moment. Turkey Hill was a former school building, right? Not Turkey Hill, TC Passios. It needed a new roof when it was turned over to the town. We have to think sometimes that voters aren't going to pay for a new roof on a vacant building, but 80% of the use of the building right now is school uses. Or let me rephrase that, school or child-related uses. 20% of the building is no longer usable because the roof wasn't fixed. The impact of not doing maintenance on buildings kind of boxes you in on what you can do with the building. We wouldn't need such a significant renovation of the building if the maintenance was done when it needed to get done. Same thing goes with the old primary school. Water is the biggest threat to every property, every structure. It's always water. And the same thing with the old primary school. That while that was also under the school's care and custody, it needed a new roof. It wasn't done because I think that the attitude was, we don't know what we're going to do with this building. Why will we pay for that? And the mindset needs to shift to, we have the building under our care and control. We need to do everything we can to maintain it. That puts us in a better position overall. I spent some time, most of the properties in my portfolio that I manage are historic structures. Many of them have been around for a long period of time. I've worked in, downtown Cambridge, right in Harvard Square area, looking across at buildings that are hundreds of years old. Now, I know that elementary and secondary education is not comparable to what goes on in the college level. But I think that I'm mentioning it to note that when students graduate school and they go on all these tours, they're looking at these 200-year-old buildings and these 200-year-old castles. That I think that, we have to replicate what higher education is doing in the regard of making sure that buildings are here and we can use them for future needs. Even if today we don't know what that future need is, if today we've identified that there's a need for the building, we need to move forward with resolving those needs, especially when it deals with water. We know that buildings need plumbing. We know they need electricity. We know they need roofs. Some things like HVAC and other things can wait, but those things typically can't. So if there's hesitance to take money because it would make you ineligible for 10 more years, I would encourage you to conduct some form of analysis to see if it's worth it. And to look at it through the lens of the town, that if the town can spend 50% of the cost to shore up this building, why put us in a position where the town will assume 100% of the cost? That it seems to be in all of our best interest to take the free money while we can get it. Again, I know that that's a shift in mindset. I preface this whole thing by saying I'm not usually successful convincing people that this is the way to go. But as someone who deals with this on the back end all the time, that it's the one thing that I always see is that when people aren't 100% committed to a building, they stop investing in them. And in my opinion, so long as you're living in a building, continue to invest in it because it provides us more options for the future. And if you can take 10 million today, if you can spend $14 million today, but it locks them into that building for 10 more years, what I would argue is that I don't see the probability of the town spending $30 million on a building that we don't have a use for. So,
Mr. Jeffries, can I just ask you a question relative to what you just said?
of course,
So what you just suggested is that the town go in and the school department go in and put in the applications for the upgrades with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. The timeline on that would be, we don't know, right? So the problem is when you submit this paperwork, you're put into a priorities list based on need. And it might come next year, it might come 2 years, it might come 5 years from now. But let's say the worst case scenario, or the best case scenario, is it all comes next year. As the chairman of the select board, would you support shifting forward our $14 million in our capital plan and deprioritizing other town capital items so that we can do this and follow the path that you just suggested to contribute our portion?
I would not be in favor of doing that next year, but if that were to happen in 3 years or 4 years from now, I would support that. You know, I think that what I'm suggesting is for there to be some form of an analysis. You had mentioned earlier to get some new numbers on a new Turkey Hill. And I think that if the board kind of takes a broad picture, if the school committee takes a broad approach on this, and you come up with some numbers and you say, you know, a new building will cost this much money. But if we invest in the current building that we already have, and you know, and figure out what that dollar amount is, I think that there's some analysis that can be done here to figure out if it's in all of our best interest to spend $14 million today, rather than the town being in the position in 8 years from now, if that building, you know, again, I'm asking you also to figure out building disposition as you figure out new building plans, to not leave that as a town function. And so if you're saying today, I don't have a use for this building altogether, then I would hope that your plans would be to demolish it and go to your, you know, go unfortunately to the trailers for 2 years that nobody wants to be in. But if your plan is not to demolish that building, then I hope I'm being clear that I think you need to conduct some analysis to see if it's in all of our best interest to spend some money today, because it puts us in a better position tomorrow. You know, you can get access to those funds that we can't get access to. And once that building gets turned over to the municipality, we're not eligible for that other $14 million. So what is that $14 million worth? You know, is it worth 10 years? And I think that you can conduct the analysis to identify if it is or not.
By the way, the reimbursements are not 14 million, but it's several million. The other point that I just wanted to make real briefly that I think everybody needs to keep in mind, I got this perspective on the tour that you recommended that I take back in July. Mrs. Champagne made I think an excellent point when we were walking through that building, and I think you and I went to middle school in that building. I know
We did.
That's not an elementary school, and there are things that you do when you program space for certain uses, such as an elementary school space, that you would do differently in a middle school or a high school or a college. And that school is not an elementary school. It's serving the purpose of an elementary school right now, but it is not an elementary school. And so, for example, and this is just one, elementary schools have sinks and single stall or double stall bathrooms in the classrooms today when you build them. Most of TC Passio's classrooms, at least on the West Wing, have sinks in them, or did when it was a school. I don't know if all those classrooms do anymore. So those are the kinds of things that if we were to make that long-term investment, we would also need to consider. And that's just one example, but that is not an elementary school. It is very much a middle school, and we would need to consider that as well.
Yeah, and I hope, you know, and I hear you, and I agree with you. Walking through the building, I raised several concerns. I'm not as comfortable saying in a public meeting, but I raised several concerns privately about the building, the layout of the building based on my professional experience, and the need that if it's going to continue to be used in its current capacity, there needs to be significant investment into the building pretty immediately. You know, several areas have already been renovated, as you're aware, on the first floor, not so much on the second floor. And there's definitely some need there. But what I'm trying to urge, though, as it speaks to Turkey Hill, I know we may be a little kind of on the boundaries of the topic, but what I'm trying to urge is for you to conduct that analysis, that if you can get another 10, 15 years out of that building to try. That overall, that's going to save us money. And then when we look at debt capacity, you know, when we resolve this town building issue, it's resolved. And our mindset is that we're looking for like a 200-year solution here. And to be fair, And so, we're not, we have a library. I think as we project out 100 years, we don't see ourselves building another library in any of our lifetimes. If we resolve our town building issues, we don't see ourselves needing any new town hall, any new school admin offices. We don't see that need in the rest of our natural lifetimes, or perhaps even your children's lifetimes. But we know that there's going to be a need for schools. And so if we can position ourselves, thinking again long-term, if we can position ourselves so that way we have the capacity to continue to meet the needs of the kids as we've always done, that it just might require in this interim, in this time period, for us to do something a little differently than what we've been doing. Again, the town has been really good about building new schools and being supportive to the kids, but I'm urging a change in process, that, that zeal for a new school needs to be coupled with a zeal to reuse the existing building. And if there's not a need for that building, to find a way to continue to utilize it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr.
So that way we don't find ourselves in this cycle again, where we build new schools, then we have an old one, and now we're, that needs a new roof, that needs renovation, that needs a known investments. And then we're kind of on the hook for it. I know we've taken a lot of your time this evening. Carol, I want to thank you for being so generous with me. Peter, as always, for the questions, and also the rest of the board. My intent tonight was not to be argumentative. I hope that I was not, but to try to provide some more clarification. I have some good notes to come back with. And again, if you do have a second follow-up meeting in which you kind of have a workshop on this, I probably don't need to attend, but I would be very interested in receiving that feedback. It's the intent of the committee to meet again in November to collect the feedback from, and to discuss and review the feedback from the school committee, from the select board, and also from the planning board and APDC. So, you do have plenty of time here to get back to us. I would just ask that you if you're going to do the workshop, that you just give us those updates by the end of November.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate you coming to talk to us and talk with us and listening to our comments.
I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Michael Ray. Thank you very much.
All right, and I want to give you a preview. I'm running here. I want to give you a preview that I will be shooting all of you guys an email of environmental policies from the select board. They're draft policies, and on those, it only applies to properties under the care and custody of the select board. But we are looking for your feedback, your thoughts, before we enact it into policy.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a good
again.
evening.
Have a good night.
Okay, moving on. We have an assessment report.
So I'll invite Mrs. Scott and Mrs. Raboyne and Mrs. McLean.
Thank you for listening to all our building chit chat. And we appreciate you waiting out our meeting, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us. Do you want me to present it, Dr. Burnham? I think I have. Okay. So we plan to do kind of a condensed fall assessment report, and I say condensed because we have scheduled Zoom meetings, as Dr. Burnham mentioned earlier, with families to dive in deeper to each building's results and to offer support for going over the individual student results that we sent home. So I'm going to start with our spring MCAS assessment report here. I want to point out a few things about the spring MCAS for 2022. It was the first full MCAS administration for grades 3 through 8 since 2019, since 2020 was canceled and 2021 was an abbreviated test. Grade 10 students had not taken an MCAS test since 2019 when they were in grade 7. State results, Dr. Burnham and I attended a DESE report on MCAS results, and they provided information that they are showing an increase in a slight increase in math scores, a decline in ELA scores, particularly in writing, and a slight increase in science scores as compared with 2021. Absenteeism was a particularly strong challenge across the state during the last school year, 21-22. 1.7 million days of school were missed due to positive COVID-19 cases. This does not include days missed for contact tracing and other illnesses. And in particular, Lunenburg students missed close to 14,000 days of school, and Lunenburg teachers missed 2,990 days during the 21-22 school year. So before we get into the MCAS scores, I want to just remind people of the cut scores on MCAS, 440 to 470, or 440 to 469, not meeting, 470 to 499, partially meeting, 500 to 529, meeting expectations, and 530 to 560 is exceeding. You'll see in some of our data, we've combined the meeting and exceeding because that is what we are shooting for with our students. And that's some of the data that the state provided to us for us as well. You'll see student growth percentiles in our data. These growth percentiles are based on a cohort of students. So the best way I can explain it is a similar cohort of students who have performed at a certain level on past MCAS tests, and then comparing the growth of that group of students or an individual student to that group on the 2022 test. 1 through 19 will be very low growth, 20 to 39 low, 40 to 59 typical, 60 to 79 high, and 80 to 99 very high. So we definitely want to be above 40 and looking for that 60 plus high growth ideally. So for grades 3 through 5 here, you can see our percentages for district performance and versus a state performance. We also, so we broke it down by cut score for exceeding, meeting, partially meeting, and not meeting. We're providing you with data on the district average scaled score for each grade level and content area. And then right next to it, the state average scaled score, we included the plus or minus there because that is some data that we always pay attention to, not just how we're doing in general, how are our students doing, but how are we performing in comparison to the state. The average student growth percentiles are there as well. And then 2 pieces of data. So the percent change, what we did was we combined the meeting and exceeding categories. So for grade 3 LA, for example, we'd be adding 38, the meeting percentage, and 5% the exceeding to combine and get a meeting and exceeding percentage. And we're looking at the percent change from the 2021 test, which was an abbreviated test in a hybrid year, with some students working remotely, some of the students coming in to take the test and entering school for the first time in over a year. So the percent change 21 to 22 for our district, and then compared to what the state percent change was. And then also comparing to that 2019 test, which was the last test given prior to COVID. So a similar test administration, but again, we're dealing with the fallout of several years of education disruption. And definitely, you know, we know that we're below the state average on the percent change in some of these areas where we're at or above, and in some of the other where we're taking a close look at, you know, the grade level data. And I will mention some of the improvements that the implementations that we've already put in place this year. Same data for grades 6, 7, and 8. I want to mention that grades 8 and 5 take the science MCAS tests, and they're a combination of what you're learning in grade 5. It's a combination of what you're learning in grades 3, 4, and 5, and 8 is a combination of what you're learning in 6, 7, and 8. And again, some, real consideration where we see we're falling below the state average or struggling as a grade level, and we need to consider how we can improve, but at the same time, acknowledge that this has been an incredibly difficult past couple of years for all students and educators. Grade 10, we typically do see improvement in grade 10. I know that one of the important pieces of information is that high school students must pass the MCAS and in order to graduate. So that's, I guess I would call a carrot that we can kind of put in front of 10th grade students where we don't have anything like that at the lower levels. And I'm proud of our high school students and staff for some of the scores they were able to get during COVID. But again, some of the percent changes are still concerning here as well. So before we get into some of the iReady scores for the fall, I wanted to connect, we're using iReady in the district, as you know, grades K through 8. And, a question we're often asked is that a predictor of MCAS scores? And it can be to some level. So iReady provided us with crosswalk information. So because iReady scores come in the categories of mid or above level, early on grade level, 1 grade level below, or 2 or more grade levels below, it does not correspond exactly to MCAS, but they gave us the crosswalk scores. So we spent some time breaking those down. You're going to see those on the next slide. I want to just put consideration that for reading, iReady is a reading test. It does not include writing. MCAS ELA tests do include a significant amount of writing. So it isn't quite comparing apples to apples, but you'll see the percentages are relative. And we're also keeping track at our district level of student accountability. And I removed the student information. I just wanted to show you a quick peek here. So this is like, these are columns I cut and pasted from a document that we use. And to the left, the columns would read, the student information, their demographic information. But looking across, you can see I sorted this here by the ELA fall results and then the math fall results. And just scrolling down quickly, you can see there's definitely a discrepancy when you look at the 3rd grade MCAS, but that was, again, the 21 abbreviated test. When you look down, you'll see that, the color-coded data at a glance is not far off when you're looking at iReady and MCAS scores. And of course, if we run across a student like this one here, row 54, this would be an exceeding score in purple, but now we're down into the one, partially meeting. So we would take a look at what might be going on with a student like that when we see a discrepancy. But we do want to point out that we're keeping our own accountability data at the district level. And in addition to MCAS and iReady, we're going to add the module assessment data from the K through 5 new curriculums and decide at the middle school level what exact data we would like to collect. So quickly taking a look at, this is the spring iReady data compared to the spring MCAS tests. So I'm going to show you the fall data momentarily, but when I'm looking at kids who were in grade 3 last spring, who are now in grade 4, comparing the percentages of, total students on the grade level, you'll see that they're not, I don't think I ran across, looking quickly, grade 3 math here, this is a 19% difference. So that's certainly a difference, but a lot of these are very close in percentages. So it does predict to a point. They're not the exact same tests. As you know, they're each only one measure and kids are taking them on different days, and you never know, you know, what's going on with a particular kid. Again, the reading test includes writing for MCAS, so it's not 100% apples to apples, but we do feel like it can predict MCAS to some extent. And then you can see here the grade 6, 7, and 8 data as well for ELA and math. So moving into the fall iReady assessment. We've given you a snapshot of each building. So we're seeing percentages again. For example, here, primary school has 30 students. That's 9% of the total students mid or above grade level in the fall. 20% early on grade level. 66% one grade level below, which is not unusual because if I'm a second grade student who's performing one grade level below second grade on the second week of school, then that is also considered typical, but we're looking for that 100% minimum of 100% growth for each student. So they're growing a whole grade level each year. And for some who are seeing gaps and who are falling behind, we're looking for more than 100% growth. So we're taking a close look at that. And then of course, any students who are 2 or more grade levels below, we're talking about these students in student support team. What can we do? What's going on? Has a student been identified, and what other supports can we provide? In addition to, as students stay one level below, moving forward throughout the school year. Turkey Hill. Looking at, 45% of students testing as early on or mid or above grade level in the fall. But again, paying close attention to this 20+% of students who are 3 or more grade levels below. And then our middle school data. Again, we gave these tests. The reading test was given the second week of school, and the math the third, other than kindergarten was 1+ weeks behind that. You can see a breakdown of each grade level here, and teachers look at their data and we look at teacher data. If I click on each one of these grade levels, I can see a breakdown of classes, of students, and again, we're looking at the accountability of individual students across as well. Breakdown of grades 6, 7, and 8 for reading. And then I'm going into the math scores for the primary school. We are seeing the math scores from iReady lower than reading across the board. That's something we're paying close attention to. Turkey Hill. And the middle school. Math breakdown of the grade levels. I also want to, point out that a real challenge for teachers is, and I pointed this out before on these meetings, that they're responsible for teaching students the grade level content. But in our current day and age, they're also responsible for helping fill some of the gaps that COVID left. And, in a subject like reading or math, that's a particular challenge because it's important for us to be able to scaffold for our students so that they can access the tier 1 grade level material. iReady helps us break down some of the targeted interventions that we can provide as well. This is a snapshot of the individual student, a sample individual student report. These are what were sent home to parents with our MCAS scores and previously to primary school parents. At the Zoom drop-in meetings, we'll go over these results in greater detail. It shows that the reading and the math both break down the individual student scores by domain. So, you know, in this case, you see a student performing on grade level or testing out in certain areas of reading, and then behind significantly in one area. So following this data, I did want to point, we all wanted to point out from the curriculum office, some of the changes that we've already made in response to, you know, this data and data that we've been seeing for the past couple of years. So as you know, we have new high quality standards aligned curriculum for grades K through 5 in both ELA and math. That is being implemented now and is very overwhelming for the teachers to be working with, but they're all doing a great job with it. We have full-time literacy and math specialists who are supporting and coaching teachers in grades K through 8. So they're working on breaking down those modules in math and literacy because the time required is so great, and we are prioritizing for the teachers what lessons are must-dos and where can we kind of build in some extra time. Our literacy and math specialists have also been meeting with middle school teachers every other week in common planning as well. Part of our new curriculum includes a workshop model of learning, which is a new style for some, being implemented in grades K through 5. We are fine-tuning our multi-tiered systems of support throughout the district. Students in grades K through 8, this is something we have mandated this year, that students are required to complete 30 to 45 minutes per week on their iReady MyPath, which is a personalized learning platform based on the iReady assessment data in both reading and math. That is what the company recommends, and we're going to reflect on it and see if it is helping kids to move, you know, and close some of those gaps. We are using all of our data to provide targeted interventions based on student needs, both during intervention time and all the schedules and through Title I. As I said, we're reviewing iReady, MCAS, and classroom data. And finally, we wrote the 2-year student learning goals for grades K through 8 ELA and math teachers, which includes the target of getting 80% of our students on grade level over the next 2 years.
Can I just ask a quick question on that? Oh, look at that, questions.
Yeah,
Can you just go back to the previous slide?
sure.
So this is a 22 to 23 curriculum change, and I'm looking at your last bullet around this 2-year student learning goal for K to 8. We've just absorbed an awful lot of information, so it's very difficult to kind of separate, and you know, there's a lot of information here to.
Sure.
But I'm assuming that from this, you're kind of determining like this is our biggest issue, right? Is ELA and math and K through 8. Is that a fair conclusion or not?
I guess I'll say yes on that, because those 2 areas are so important for students. I'm not belittling science, social studies, or any of the other content areas 100%, but we, you know, literacy, for example, at the primary school, you know, grade levels are spending 120 minutes a day on it.
Which is great.
And those foundational skills are so important. So we're really honing on that. Next year, I do want to circle to the other content areas, for example, at the primary school, science and social studies, but we just can't break the teachers, and we're already overwhelming them as it is. Does that answer your question?
It does. What the question that I was really getting to was, and I apologize, Carol, for kind of jumping in. This was going to be a quick question on that slide because I thought there was more to come, but this is a 2-year goal, 80% of students on grade level. So is this an iReady or an MCAS or a both goal? And this would be reflected in this report in October of 2024. I'm just trying to get my arms around, like,
Yep.
what are we actually setting here from a numerical goal that we can measure, right?
Good question. We did write in the goals that we would base the measure on the spring iReady data of 2024, but it's, you know, if you think about it, if I'm a grade 4 teacher, I have a cohort of students in front of me this year, and I'm looking to move them closer to grade level for those who are below this year. And then next year I have a new cohort of students. So if I'm a 4th grade teacher, now the 5th grade teachers need to work with me. And that's part of our thinking too. We're all responsible for all of our students. You know, the 10th grade MCAS scores are partly due to the strength of the teaching in K through 9. So we do want to work together. We're measuring by iReady, but having said that, we want to make sure we keep track of the other data as well, because, you know, if a teacher's saying this student is doing so well on all of our module assessments, but they aren't scoring well on iReady or MCAS, we need to kind of intervene there and see what's going on. We also realize, I mean, 80% is a lofty goal. I think it's attainable, but definitely lofty. And, you know, one of our intentions is to take, we most of the time have interventions in place for the kids who are in red, so to speak, 2 or more grade levels below. And if not, we'll move on that quickly. For the kids in yellow who are 1 grade level below, we want to make sure that they're not, you know, falling below the radar. We're asking our teachers to pay particular attention to those kids. What do they need? Because some of them might just need, you know, a little bit, or some of them, oh, there are these gaps that are we need to scaffold with you in order to get you to access this grade level content. So we're really asking teachers to think about intervening with all our students. You know, frankly, we have this intervention time and we're asking them to work with the students who are on or above with challenging, you know, interventions. I want to make sure we're challenging all of our kids.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Carol, I think you're muted.
That's twice in one night. Is there anyone else that has questions for Mrs. Scott? You can sing out because I can't see you.
I do, Carol.
Sure, go ahead.
I am completely fascinated by the data you guys have, and so this is really interesting. Can you say, based on the data that you have, if the impacts of the missed years due to COVID are having an outsized impact on younger students versus older students? Is there anything like that? Like, is it squishing down scores for the little guys, but not having as much of an impact in the higher grades?
I mean, the best I can speak to that is going back to, I'll just quickly flick back to these slides where it shows the percent change. I mean, but this is only measured by MCAS, right? So, and again, I'm constantly saying this is only one measure because, you know, having been an ELA teacher, I know that some of the data that came from some of my students was not an accurate portrayal of how they did in my class, because for whatever reason, they just didn't perform well on a test. So this is one measure. You can certainly see in some of the, I mean, our data is showing we're further into the negative percent changes at the Turkey Hill level than we are at the middle school, but not across the board. You know, you definitely see here some areas where we are going to need improvement, and even what we can look at, I didn't put it into this presentation, but we look at the breakdown of standards on the test, how we're performing against the state. You know, typically anything that's at or below state level is a red flag for us. We're saying, okay, we need to be better in that area. We're definitely seeing more of the red across the board. And just like the state is seeing, one of the main areas is in writing across the board. You know, in almost every grade level, we were in the red. So we're prioritizing that. That's a tricky question, I guess, is my answer, because I think those foundational skills are so important and so tough with COVID gaps. But then as kids move up with gaps, now it's hard, you know, to teach them the 4th and 5th grade information and the 6th, 7th, and 8th. So it's,
Annika,
yeah.
wanted just to say one thing. A large impact of the COVID was with the social emotional aspect, and that impacted all of the grades. And so we had to start really incorporating that and working on looking at the whole child versus just our academic data. And that has been a huge change in what has been changing with our curriculum, trying to merge it, because everyone was suffering. I mean, you look at those absences, I mean, it was a profound effect, and we will be feeling that effect for years to come, unfortunately, because it's not over. I mean, people are still going to get sick, and we're worried, and we may stay out because we're concerned. So this is going to be something we're going to be battling. I think we're doing a good job of jumping ahead so that we don't fall behind. I think that's what a lot of our evidence is showing, is that we're doing what needs to be done, the curriculum team and working with the social workers and our SST. So I think it's like we're getting ready. I mean, we're prepared for
Yeah.
the fallout,
And
I guess.
Dr. Burnham and our office talked about maybe coming back and showing you a little bit more about our new curriculums and how things are going with that as the year goes on. Like I said, it's a giant undertaking for teachers and for students. I mean, we've been doing some sweeps through the classrooms, and it's so nice to see that consistent program being used across grade levels and vertically. One of the things in particular, you know, for example, in math, the term add-ins, I heard that in a 2nd grade room, and then the next day in a 5th grade room. But it was so great to hear the math vocabulary consistently. But we're hoping that will help us over the years, because kids will be coming up better prepared. But it's not going to be a magic, you know, wand by this spring. We know that. And even frankly, our teachers just finished with module 1 for HMH, our new curriculum. Now they're in module 2. It's getting a little bit easier. And, you know, after a full year of teaching through all the modules, now next year will be not just easier for the teachers, but they'll be better at it. You know what I mean? And then the students moving up and being used to the design of their curriculum will be better at it as well. But we just want to be honest about, you know, what we're putting in place, but that it's not a magical fix. Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr. Beardmore.
Beardmore?
Yeah, and you may not have an answer for this. I just want to let you know what I'm thinking about, and maybe this is a conversation for another day. You know, one of the areas that I'm a little bit concerned about is I think we should absolutely be focusing on these kids that are, you know, 2 and 3 years behind grade level. That's very alarming to me. On the other hand, I do worry that, you know, we've had some extraordinary achievers come out of Lunenburg that are on the left side of those color charts that you have, who are at or above grade level. And, you know, are we not doing everything we can do there because we're focusing over there? And how does that all happen from an education standpoint? I'm sure you could not explain that to me tonight, but I wonder about it.
Well,
What
quickly, we can say that on the, sorry, Deirdre.
Oh, that's okay. You go ahead. I was just going to.
We're adamant to our teachers about sticking to the curriculum in terms of the grade level content, that is the most important piece, that we're not, you know, teaching 5th grade, oh, but we need to go back and teach all these 3rd grade skills. We scaffold as needed for them to access the information. And it is hard. We are definitely hearing from teachers saying, you know, this curriculum is challenging, but we want to look with the lens too of, okay, well, this is a vetted curriculum. It's high quality. You know, it's been vetted by the state, by even the nation. We use ed reports. So this is what our kids should be able to work with. And if they can't, okay, then how can we get them to the level where they can? But definitely those intervention blocks that we've scheduled right through grade 12, a little looks different at the high school, but K through 8, we want intentional targeted interventions given to students, and that includes the kids who are mid or above grade level. Let's challenge them.
Great. One other just question is relating to the statistics that you have. And I'm sure there'll be some great insights that'll come out of the equity audit. I'm sure some of this information is cross-tabbed there. Do you look at students that participate in extracurriculars, bands, science Olympiad, sports, those kinds of things? And are you able to, you know, connect any of those dots or even track, you know, how those additional activities that we offer, enrichment activities that we offer, may contribute to academic success?
I have not taken data on that. When we meet in student support team, that might be something that we consider or even recommend to a particular student. But no, I haven't taken data on that currently, and that would be interesting.
It is data that we could track though.
Yeah.
Well, we actually did a little bit at the Turkey Hill because we had students who wanted band and chorus, and they also needed intervention. And we were really kind of analyzing those. And it was interesting, you know, to see, but no, I haven't physically added that as one of a subgroup.
And I want to be careful. I don't want to ask you to do additional work, right? But on the other hand, like, you know, I've raised before I was on the school committee, like, you know, anything that I can encourage my kids to do, I push them as much as I can. I pay the tab, I, you know, do whatever. But, you know, there's a lot going on. A lot of these extracurricular things cost money for parents and that sort of thing. And I think we need to be mindful from a budget standpoint for what we ask the town for support, for all those kinds of things, and be able to justify, like, no, these programs actually do translate into not only developing the whole person, which is part of our mission, but also to their academic success.
I think on your
100%.
point, Peter, too, I would just add too, like even the youth program, sports and
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's because, you know, we have limited sports in middle school and, you know, but we do have extracurricular enrichment programs in the elementary and middle school. I'm not really sure about the primary school, but you're right. Those youth sports activities.
sorry, I had to mute myself. But also like Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts,
Yep.
all that activity, like if we can collect data on that, that would be awesome because you could probably connect it and show that it involved students are going to do better in school. I think
I'd love to
it
know
would be
that.
surprising.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Something we should consider.
Well, it's also part of, like, you know, I really want to get our community more involved. I want parents to push their kids to get involved in activities. I want the parents involved in the activities. Like I've said it many times now, like I grew up in Lunenburg in a much more active, vibrant, school-centered community. And I envision bringing some of that back, but to be able to show empirical evidence that these types of activities lead to success, I think would be very helpful.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. My comment would be that I am impressed that, first off, that all the information is so at the teacher's fingertips, because that is what they need. And they need the understanding of how to interpret the data. And that's what was missing before. And I have to say that I know it's discouraging that the test scores are not where you would like them to be, but here is my take on that. And my take is this, that when Dr. Burnham came here, no two classrooms were doing the same thing. Everybody was doing their own deal. The curriculum was not aligned K to 6, never mind K to 5. It wasn't aligned. Those basic things were not in place. So as she got those basic things in place, as she gathered you experts to help the teachers, as she put this department in place, then you get whopped by COVID. So all that momentum all of a sudden was splattered, and now it's coming back together. So I know that we'd like those scores to be higher. Everything about me that is an educator tells me they will be, because you're doing what you need to do to get them there. And we haven't done that before in the school district. And I am very impressed with the work that you've done. And I am sure that maybe 80% is a lofty goal. Maybe you'll come to 73, but you're moving, and it should move. And if it doesn't, we'll have the data to know why.
Right.
So,
And I want to add that the HMH curriculums provide a dashboard for us, so that when, even kids can take these module assessments digitally, and it grades them instantly for the teachers and provides a breakdown of on, above, or below grade level. You may have heard through the grapevine, we had a glitch with that this week. There was a tech issue on HMH's side, and some of the data got deleted, but we were able to recover at least the scores. But moving forward, we are so happy with what we can even see through HMH, and just easily add, to our collection of student data, because I think that the day-to-day in the classroom is arguably most important versus, this 3 benchmarks a year or 1 benchmark a year. So I definitely want to take a look at that, even though we're measuring by iReady, ultimately.
I would absolutely agree with that. So thank you very much. Thank you for hanging out with us. Okay, so we're going to go on to strategy for continuous improvement action plans.
So these were initially brought forward to you, I believe, at the September 7th meeting for an initial look. And I held off on bringing them back for a final approval until all of the goals for my evaluation were settled upon, so that I could make sure that they were captured to some extent in the action plans as well. I know that, you should have had an opportunity over the last month plus to take a look at these. I don't know if anybody has any questions or concerns.
Does anyone have questions regarding the strategies? I had a couple of quick ones that were very, very short. I was wondering if you could define the term relationship mapping. I mean, I know it has to do with kids connecting with teachers, but I don't know what that looks like. Could you define that?
Yep. So last year, as part of the action plan and the climate culture goal, that we're now entering year 2 of that goal, we did an activity with the staff to see how many of the students in each building, staff felt that they had a connection with individual students, and look to see, how many students were not identified by a staff member as someone that they felt that they had a connection with. The interesting thing is this year, we're going to look to do a similar activity with the students from the student lens. Do the students feel like they have the same connection with the teacher who says that they have the connection with the student? Because if the student doesn't also agree that they have the connection that the teacher believes exists, then the connection isn't really there. So we are going to engage in that this year, doing that activity with students. Can they identify as staff member, and it does not have to be a teacher that they have in the given year. It could be a previous year teacher, it could be a coach, it could be the nurse, it could be an administrator, it could be any number of individuals. But we need to hear from the kids. Who do you think you would be able to go to as a trusted adult, somebody that you've connected with here in your school community? And I think that once we have the results from a student lens, and we bring that back to teachers, the conversation then is going to be, okay, so I thought I had a connection, but apparently I don't. What does a connection with the student really look like? How can I know for sure that I have the connection that I think I have with the student? What does it mean from a student lens? How did they define what leads to that connection with a staff member? The kids will help identify what they're looking for in the adults in the community that make them feel that connection. So it's an ongoing process. We know from a survey a couple of years back now that the Wellness Advisory did, that there were a subset of students at the high school where the survey was conducted that did not feel that they had a single adult in the building that they felt that they were connected with. And there were others that indicated that they just didn't feel a sense of belonging in general in the building. So those are things that we have been aware of and we are working toward. And honestly, I mean, this dialogue around what's at the foundation of the student and teacher or staff member relationship, the connection, that sense of belonging. It was the focus of my dissertation. So this has been an important fascination for me for decades, honestly. It was important to me when I was in the classroom. And I learned an awful lot by talking to and listening to kids. And they consistently say the same things matter. But we need for our teachers and our staff to discover that as well. So that's this exercise, and that's where we're heading. That's the conversation that we need to start having.
Thank you. Mr. Schoenbrini.
Well, you buried the lead. What were the things?
Well, I don't
Stay
I know
tuned.
the answer. It's like giving the answer before the test.
I'm not in class. I just want the answer.
I want to be able to have the conversation organically evolve with the teachers around this and hearing from the kids what matters. But I fully anticipate that I will be able to tell you what they're going to say matters. But I do think it's really important for teachers to discover this for themselves without me telling them what the answer to the quiz is going to be before the quiz. I can talk to you offline, Mr. School.
Okay, that's fine.
There you go. There you go. Does anyone else have a question about the strategies? Mr. Beardmore?
So just to kind of piggyback on your last point very briefly, I think that is super important. I think that, it may be that, with all the other measurements that we've been talking about over the course of the last hour plus, like the relationships get lost because you spend so much time teaching to the test and measuring. And as somebody who was educated in a time where you might have gotten a standardized test once a year, and who knows what they did with that information, and a product of the Lunenburg schools, names like, I get choked up just saying them because they had such an impact on my life, but they were, I don't think that those teachers that had that impact, necessarily, it was it was organic to their personality and the time that they spent and the extracurricular activities that they ran and their genuine concern for me as an individual student in their classroom. But that was just, those certain teachers resonated with my personality. I was visiting my first cousin in Seattle a few weeks ago, and my number one teacher, who I always, and I won't say his name right now, but who I always refer to as the most influential teacher in my life, he had an incredibly poor opinion of, and it has nothing to do with anything other than what resonated with what kid, right? And what relationship you developed. And he had a higher opinion of other teachers that I didn't have a high opinion of, and didn't have that relationship with. So I think that, it's just, this could not be more important, just in terms of, even as adults, as these kids go on to become adults and members of society, how they reflect and how they value public education in their own communities, wherever they land. And the repercussions of this are incredibly important.
Well, they're super important, because I can tell you one thing for sure. Kids will not work for teachers that they don't connect with.
Good point.
They will go above and beyond for the teachers that they do. And that's their academics. They will go above and beyond for the teachers that they do. So it is an integral part of the big picture. And it's important work. It's important conversation. And it's an important light bulb moment for teachers to come to around, well, what do kids say matter? Because that's ultimately what really matters. They can tell you what creates that connection with the teacher. Teachers just need to listen.
So I do have just one other comment and a really general question. So I did note that you had added some things around communication and family engagement and that kind of thing. You highlighted them, I think, for me, maybe, which I appreciate.
No, I just wanted to be sure that those were the add-ons to the previous
I
iteration.
appreciate you doing that. My real question is there, and you may not have an answer for this now, but please think about it. Is there anything that we can do as school committee members, as a school committee, or as people who are involved in other groups and activities to help? And are there ways that potentially we could engage the community to kind of rally support for some of these improvements?
That's a really good question. I don't have anything specific at this point, something actionable. I will say that over the course of the last few years, while this strategy has been executed, this strategy was adopted by the school committee. I believe it was November of 2019, and a handful of months later, schools were closed. And then through 2 years of COVID disruption and the quarter of a year that we were closed, we continued to execute on this strategy. And we've made a lot of gain in all areas of the strategy. Maybe it's just luck, but the needs of the kids that emerged because of COVID aligned with the identified needs already that were in that strategy, which allowed us to continue to move forward in execution of it. And I would say that from the beginning, I've always felt that I had the support of the committee in doing this work. And I say that because when we come forward with ideas for how we're going to target our ESSER funds, it does connect back to the strategy. There's support for that. When I developed the SOA plan, it connected back to the strategy. There was support for that. When we're talking about setting a budget, the committee hears my rationale for what we're trying to accomplish, and I make the connections back to how this connects to the strategy. And I've always had support for that. So I would say the committee over all of these years has provided support in a variety of ways. But I certainly will give consideration to what more specific actionable type of support we could have. I would say one of the biggest actionable things that we're working on is the school committee jumping behind the equity portion of the strategy and going down the road of this equity audit. I think it's important. You know, I've said it many times over the last several years. I do feel that I have always been fortunate enough to have that governance team experience. Not all superintendents have that sort of relationship with their committees, right? Like when we have these workshops, Dorothy Presser comes in and talks about the role of the school committee and the superintendent. And that's one of the things that she talks about, is that together, the committee and the superintendent are the governance team. And I really honestly have always felt that it has been a team effort. So I would say that I have had support from the committee my entire tenure here.
Good.
And there have been people with differing opinions, and you know, I think that just makes it a bit stronger because you consider more broadly different perspectives. And again, I don't mean to say that everybody has to unanimously agree to everything and everybody has to say 100% on the first, you know, showcase of something. Absolutely, Kate, we're 110% behind that. It's good to have the dialogue. It's good to have the questions. It's good for things to evolve. But again, that's the nature of how teams work. So that's from my perspective.
Well, I appreciate it. And
Sounds good.
let's keep this conversation, you know, like I really want to hear, like, what can we do to help? And not necessarily just in developing and approving the strategy, but how can we help garner support to find success?
Yeah, and I think, you know, that actionable piece really probably lies ahead because as the ESSER monies are going, and I've said this from the beginning, we're going to have some difficult decisions to make, because I think, as an example, tonight, you see the work that's behind, you know, everything that we're doing day to day, the impact of the director of teaching and learning, the Title I literacy specialist, the dedicated full-time math specialist, working to support teachers, implementing a brand new curriculum, breaking down all the data for them, working with them to identify what they can do to support individual students. We have interventionists, intervention teachers, intervention tutors. We have the additional social workers. You know, there are going to be some difficult decisions ahead, because I think it's highly likely that we're going to have data that indicates that we need to keep many of these positions. So what else is going to have to go from the budget if we're going to keep those positions? Because we know we know we're not going to the town and saying, yeah, well, we need a 5% increase in the budget because we have to keep everybody. We know that that's not going to happen. We know that that's not realistic. Might we have to try to fight for a 3% instead of a 2.5%? Maybe. But we'll see. But I expect that there are going to be really difficult decisions ahead for all of us to make, you know, in the best interests of the kids in the district. So I'll keep that in mind, and I'll be thinking on that, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think the only one little comment I wanted to make that I didn't make, as it's getting late. I just wanted to congratulate you on all those established, accomplished bullets at the top of each strategy plan, the amount of things that have been completed is truly staggering. So obviously, this is a process that works, that people get behind, and it works. So well done.
Thank you.
So we need a motion to accept the strategy
So moved.
and a second.
I'll second that.
Okay. So a roll call vote, please.
Oh. All right, Mr. Schoenbrini,
Yes.
Mr. Beardmore,
Yes.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Mrs. Archambault.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
All right, thank you. On to committee reports. Who has committee reports tonight in our new format here? Mr. Beardmore?
Capital Planning Committee met on Monday. It was a review of the submittals that have been made and the evaluation criteria that has essentially already happened and has been submitted as part of the submissions for the capital items. And we have a rough schedule for our next 3 meetings. The next one will be next Wednesday, I believe at 6 p.m. And I believe the school department will be presenting. So I mentioned to Dr. Burnham before the meeting, I'd like to do a pre-brief with her and the facilities director if possible prior to that. And we will go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, I'll jump in with mine. The Finance Committee met on October 13th, and the discussion was about debt capacity, as you have heard this evening. So I don't have to go through that too much. What I took back from that is that in 2024, there was $20 million available, and in 2032, 22 million, and assorted different ways to parcel that out. A discussion that followed indicated, and this is the part that bothered me, it indicated that that was good because the elementary school could wait 10 years till the end of it. And hopefully our discussion with Mr. Jeffries this evening would indicate, at least to the building group, that maybe it shouldn't wait that long. But I wanted to make sure, anyways, that I just wanted to make sure that you understood that that was something that many people took from that example. The next meeting is the 27th of October. I also went to the elementary school council, and school began with a positive start. Open house was well attended. Most of the parents had never been in the building before, so that was exciting. The Penny Wars made over $5,300, and they are planning on purchasing some Lego robots. Those are really cool things. My granddaughter was in a tournament with those. The kids love them. So I thought that was a wonderful purchase. They had a visit by Rob Surratt, who is the artist that does this wonderful inspirational painting. And it's a great, great, great presentation, and the PTO funded it. And I'm so happy that they were able to do it. So they have those paintings to hang. When I taught, he came, and he must have came like maybe 20 years ago at this point, and those paintings are still hanging in that auditorium. And the kids still look at them, and they weren't there, but they gain inspiration from the faces they're looking at. So that's a great, great thing. The special areas are set up for one special for 15 consecutive days. And it seems better for the kids. They're a little bit more settled on where they're going. And the teachers like it also for the consistency, and they get to have better relationships, once again, connections with the kids, because it's not just like a once every 6-day meet. They are looking for library volunteers for book checkouts. They are saying that the PBIS program is helping to create more school-wide consistency. The discipline events are way down. So that was good news. Nature's Classroom went well. All students, except for a few that were on vacation, attended. The testing scores remain a challenge. And, but she was it was interesting because Mrs. Champagne stated the additional support was the most important part of the new curriculum. The additional support to help the teachers to interpret the data and to execute the curriculum is what she feels will really make the difference. And the Zoom meeting is scheduled to discuss scores for the 24th. So that's what I have. So if no one else has anything, is there any public comment? I don't think there's much public hanging out at this point. So moving on, topics for future discussion. If we want to spend some time talking about this issue of Turkey Hill and the issue, because they're intertwined with the building committee, it's all the same issue to me. We can set up a meeting just to have that discussion. How do people feel about that?
I think we probably need an hour to bang it around as a committee and just see if, we have some consensus amongst us or can talk through the issues. I mean, I think Mr. Jeffrey's comments tonight were helpful, actually, in terms of some ways to look at some things. And I'd like to internalize it and think about it and maybe have another conversation with Mr. Jeffries. But I think that, as a group, as a committee, we kind of owe it to them to come back with a commentary that reflects the majority, if not the whole of the committee. And I think it's probably going to take us at least an hour to get there.
I would agree that I think it would take some time for us to sort through all those issues. So I would be in favor of, I don't think we can squeeze it in one of our regular meetings. That took an awful long time tonight. And, I think it's too much. So would people be in
Check,
favor?
Carol,
Is there a light meeting?
I think if we look at the schedule, I want to say maybe the first or second meeting in November is nothing pre-planned.
We have what's pre-planned. This first meeting of November is Sizer Parker School annual reports. So that doesn't take long.
Nope. You just have to vote to accept them.
Right, and they're not controversial. And the ESSER quarterly update.
And that's just a report.
So if we didn't add more stuff to it, then I think we could accomplish that in that meeting.
I honestly think if we don't finish it too, we can table it. I think Turkey Hill is always going to be a discussion that we're going to want to keep talking about and keep progressing, maybe find some action items, but I think
He did request comments submitted by the end of November.
By the end of
That would
November.
give
So,
us,
but if I look at the second meeting in November, the only thing that's down here is the quarterly budget report.
Again, that's just a report.
And that's just a report. So we would have a possibility of revisiting. We do have a habit of gaining topics, however, so we would have to be careful not to do that.
So just one request that I made to maybe put on the November calendar, and I don't really have a preference as to where it lands, but I would, as I said last meeting, I would like to have a conversation around
About the-
expectations for the staffing plan and how that relates to the
Right.
5-year fiscal forecast. And I suspect that work is going to begin in November. And so I'd prefer to get ahead of it.
Well, that makes sense. So why don't we schedule in that discussion about the 5-year forecast, staffing forecast on the 16th. And then if we have to finish up something from the 2nd, we'll either have time to do that or we'll know we have to schedule something else in. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, so why don't we plan then on talking about the building plan more deeply on the 2nd of November? Okay,
Just one other question, Carol, and I was it just struck me earlier today. I was looking for a policy today on the website and it occurred to me that we haven't, really referred any policies, or do we have a regular update schedule for policies, or this is kind of a newbie question, but how
reasonable.
or when do we determine what policies we look at, I guess is my question.
Dr. Burnham?
So right now, there have been a couple of communications that have come from the Mass Association of School Committees, and they have some recommended language to add to specific policies. Right now, Liz and I are working to go find what our version in Lunenburg of those policies are, because we don't use the MASC policies. There are districts that just adopt all the policies that come from MASC. So we're working to do that. Once we've got those all identified, then we'll schedule the meeting for the policy subcommittee to move through all of those. There's a bunch though, because typically they send one out a year, but there was a second communication that came out. We're also carrying over conversation around social media type policy language. I don't think right now there's anything else, although on the horizon, we will be bringing forward some policy language around the concession stand use. So those are things that are known that we're going to be taking a look at. But if there are specific policies that, folks think need a look over, certainly you can, put that on our radar and we can take a look at that at a meeting.
Okay. I have some thoughts, but I want to connect with you, Dr. Burnham, before
Okay.
Although it's not a policy issue because we settled the policy on it, the recreation business, we can't forget that once
Right.
the recreation director is established, we need to go back to that.
So I did have that conversation when we had a joint meeting with the town manager, the assistant town manager, the DPW director, the facility director for the town,
Right.
our facility director, our athletic director, and Mr. Cassie and I sat in this meeting as well. And we talked about the importance of, once that rec director is brought in, then that's the whole complete team.
Right.
And that we need to put in writing, identify what types of facilities are available for rental, who's the contact for which types of facilities, what's the policy, what's the procedure for requesting, and so on and so forth, as well as any facility rental fees, et cetera, so that there is a document that's comprehensive and gives an overview of all of the facilities available in Lunenburg and who's the responsible party that you need to work through. So once that individual comes on board, we can get down to work on that. I can tell you that there have been some regular meetings now with our facility director, and at the very least right now, connecting on a regular basis with the DPW. So that was an expectation that both the town manager and I shared with that team the day that we met with everyone, that we wanted them to have a regular check-in meeting schedule, keep each other updated on things that they're working on, just so that everybody's in the know, just to improve the communication town side to school side. And hopefully, develop that really cooperative, collegial, collaborative relationship between the departments. It was an expressly stated goal. So we're moving in that direction, I think.
We just need to maintain that discipline now. Got to keep it going.
Yep.
Because these things have a tendency to fall off or fall apart. And the
Yep.
trick here is the discipline, but as you well know, I think the first time I ever met you, Dr. Burnham, was over an issue around facilities use. So I looked at that.
Yes, I'd like not to have to worry about facilities use anymore.
There you go. Sounds like a deal.
Yep.
So if we do not have anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Kelly,
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 10:06 p.m.
all right, in a second,
Second.
all right. And a roll call vote.
All righty. Mr. Schoolambrini,
Yes.
Mr. Beardmore,
Yes.
Mr. Leighton,
Yes.
Mrs. Kelly,
Yes.
Mrs. Archambault.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Good evening,
everybody.
everyone.
Night.
Have a good
Good night.
evening.
See y'all on trunk or treat. You'll be hearing from me.
Sounds good.